only hear the floor, but not you, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We are currently in the setup. We will start at 4 Malaysia time or 12 p.m. UAE time, wherever you are based right now. Thank you. Jay? Hi, Jay.
Hello, how are you?
Good morning. I think your camera is off, but can you hear me clear?
I can hear you just fine.
Yep, that's awesome. Thanks for waking up so early for us. I think it's still around 4 a.m. in the morning, right?
Yeah, it's good. It's like about 4 a.m.
Yep. Oh,
Not a problem. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
it's a pleasure. I think we are just currently setting up the interpreter service. We will be starting at 4 sharp.
Okay.
If you want to test sharing your screen now, because we didn't go through it yesterday, so if you want to quickly share your screen, that would be great.
Sure.
Yep.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Good deal.
Awesome.
All right.
Hi, Homam. I think you are still on mute.
Okay, hi. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I think, Homam, now can you join using your other device so that you are able to hear the flow?
Okay, let me try momentarily.
And then I can...
Okay. I have been assigned as an interpreter.
I can't hear you. You're on mute. Come again? Yes, I can hear you, Idris. So I think Idris and Humam, you guys can agree. How are you gonna do the interpretation? Maybe the first session by session, or an hour? Okay, I think. All right. I mean, I have sent that already to Russell through the email. I think if you can quickly check with Russell. All right, just give me a moment. All right, so I will send it through WhatsApp. Then you guys can agree together through WhatsApp on how you're gonna take over session by session or how. All right, so I think you can guys turn off the camera and just each one have his own channel because you're gonna swap between the. All right, thank you. Yes, Idris? Yeah. No, your screen is not related to mine. So basically, I think both of you guys can take the Arabic channel and then you just switch on the interpreters. English to Arabic. Yeah. Interpreters, can you hear me? Yeah, I think I'm hearing myself twice, so please make sure that you're using your headphones for both devices. So both the interpreter and the attendee, make sure that you're using your headphones on, because I can hear myself twice. So thanks everyone for joining. We will be starting in probably 6 minutes from now. So stay tuned. Thank you. Hi, George. Thanks for joining.
Good morning. Hi,
Good
Azam.
morning. Yep, can hear you loud and clear. I think we're going to start in less than 30 seconds. Just want to follow the timing that we plan to avoid extending the event longer. It's already long enough. Hi, Darcy. You're on mute. You're muted. I think you're on mute. We cannot hear you.
All right, I'll get to you in a bit. The presentation is almost finished later on.
Awesome. All right, I think we're actually starting now, so you just came on time.
Great.
All right, so we could start now, everybody. So interpreters, please, you can start now. So the global economy loses more than $2 trillion annually due to smuggling, counterfeiting, trafficking of humans and wildlife, and other forms of illicit trade that holds back progress on the global development agenda. Illicit trade drains nearly 3% of the world's economy. If it were a country, its dark economy would be larger than Brazil, Italy, and Canada, and as large as Mexico and Indonesia combined. Up to 5% of imported goods to the European Union are fake. Imports of counterfeit and pirated goods are worth nearly 500 billion a year. Counterfeit goods endanger local economies, innovation, and public safety. Counterfeiting is a big business. In these days where one can buy almost anything online, no product has been left unattacked. From household products, auto parts, pharmaceuticals, and cosmetics to DVDs, softwares, mobile phones, and video games, designer bags and clothes, you name it. So the Middle East is recognized as a key transshipment hub where counterfeiters arrive in large quantities in containers and are sent to other countries in Africa and the EU region. However, several authorities, for instance, in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, customs officials are working alongside brand owners, and there are many success stories of seizures of the counterfeit goods. But at the same time, counterfeiters are becoming more resourceful, and brand owners have won some major battles, but the war is far from over. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Hazim Ibrahim, the founder and CEO of Asia Security Group and the organizer of the third virtual Anti-Counterfeiting and Brand Protection Conference. We firstly would like to thank and welcome all the speakers, the sponsors, and the participants for taking part in this event. The event will discuss the emerging challenges faced by brand owners and government agencies in combating illicit trade and counterfeiting post the COVID-19 pandemic, with a fantastic speaker lineup and 14 interactive sessions across the 2 days. So I just would like to highlight that this event is featuring simultaneous interpretation in English and Arabic. So if you are an Arabic speaker, you could you can hear the event in different language through the interpretation on the bottom right. I think you can see it on your screen. So just not to take any longer of your time, I would like to start by introducing our first speaker of the day, which is Dr. Jay Kennedy, who is an assistant professor at Michigan State University, jointly appointed to the School of Criminal Justice and the Center of Anti-Counterfeiting and Product Protection, where he serves as the Assistant Director of Research. Dr. Kennedy current research explores managerial and organizational responses to employee theft within the small and medium enterprises, the incarceration and the post-incarceration experience of white-collar offenses, the sale of counterfeit goods on the internet through social media and e-commerce, and the structure of occupational pharmaceutical counterfeiting schemes. So I think I can pass the virtual stage to you, Jay. You can share your screen now.
Great. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Hazim. Really appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me here as well today. I appreciate being able to speak with everyone And so good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my thoughts on the evolution of the supply chain as it has been impacted by COVID-19. Obviously, a global pandemic that is having impacts at various stages across the world. And so some of the things that I'll talk about, we have seen already in places like the US and the EU. We are seeing them start to pop up in other areas of the world. And the anti-counterfeiting responses that we'll see, I think will also will play out over time. However, there's an opportunity to learn a lot of good lessons from what we're seeing on the leading edge of things. So I will get going. So the first thing is, what have we observed? What have we seen so far in this space? And obviously we know that during the pandemic, and particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people were concerned about impacts to the supply chain. Most importantly, about system disruptions, so the inability to get essential equipment, materials, goods to healthcare providers, to consumers, goods moved throughout the world, particularly as workers were locked out of facilities, as businesses moved to really contain the virus and keep people socially distanced and away from each other. There were also a lot of conversations about the unrecognized or the unknown risks. So what don't we know that we don't know? No one really knew how this was going to play out, what was going to happen in terms of the system impacts to COVID. And we were all kind of sitting and waiting to see what was going to pop up. And then uncertainties in supply and demand. So we really didn't know what consumers were still going to be looking for. And the inability to forecast that made it very, very difficult to be responsive to demands. From a counterfeiting perspective, it was not clear how quickly the bad actors would be able to pivot and take advantage of everything that was going on in the world and be responsive from a bad perspective, be responsive to the changes that were being brought about as the virus developed. We ultimately saw that they were very agile, that they were very innovative, and in many ways ahead of the curve. The other thing that we saw, or that we observed, was that there was a lot of talk about how do we account for extended supply chain networks. So because the virus rolled out, or the impact of the virus was not globally felt all at the same time, there would be an opportunity to take advantage of supplies, surplus other places around the world. And so there would be an extended supply chain network. Also, the need to find alternative suppliers and distributors. Obviously, it's clear that once we start going to alternative suppliers, we understand the risks of opening up a supply chain. And then understanding how to secure essential logistics in a way that protected the supply chain were key points of discussion that were going on throughout the world. And so again, everyone was kind of figuring all of this out at the same time, which led to a lot of potential weaknesses that could be exploited. What we also saw was that there was a ripple effect. And that ripple effect obviously became magnified within complex supply chains. So the wider, the deeper, the more extensive a supply chain was, one ripple created a larger effect within those supply chains. It's unclear right now, at least, how the disruptions in one area will move to another area, or the indirect or direct impact that the impact in one area will have on another area. Now, it is very possible that the more downstream elements of a supply chain are those that are most likely to have an impact on the at least overall perceptions of the overall impact of the COVID supply chain. Now, those are perceptions, that's not the actual impact. So we'll see what actually happens when things develop. The other thing we've noticed is that in areas where consumer demand has fallen off, One of the things that the companies really need to do, and by this quote, they will have to work out how much they expect purchasing behavior to return, and when it will bounce back. Now, this is a difficult thing when it comes down to forecasting and planning. Obviously, as you're talking about resource utilization, but because of the shift to e-commerce, there will be new sources of competition, and not all of those sources of competition will be legitimate. Many will be illegitimate, and legitimate brands will have to understand and address those concerns. One of the biggest challenges that we see for governments, for brand owners, for law enforcement, is the fact that during COVID, consumerism really went on a big upswing. And ultimately, one of the lasting impacts of COVID, when the story is finally written about the pandemic, is the way in which it affected consumerism and how goods were consumed. And that ultimately, obviously, has an impact on the supply chain. According to some research that's been done, 55% of people have purchased a product online more frequently during the pandemic. So our behavior shifted, obviously. Now, this is due in part to the fact that e-commerce was starting to take away gains from the traditional retail space in general, but also due in part because of lockdowns and the inability to get out to physical marketplaces. Importantly, of those individuals who did more shopping online during the pandemic, 22%, or nearly 1/4, expect to continue that online behavior once the pandemic is done. Very important when we start thinking about what the supply chain looks like for the virtual world as opposed to the physical world. A recent study has also found that consumers are more likely to access banking services and purchase products online after the pandemic. They are less likely to do social functions such as virtual family events and online church services. So this upswing in online usage is not across the board, is very much tailored to the way in which we gather products and services. Now, this is important because it shows a trend in consumer decision-making and consumer behavior that's not reflective of a holistic shift in the ways in which we engage in traditional activities and traditional social behavior. It's centered around our commercial activities. And so from a supply chain perspective, it's not just about recognizing the fact that people are going to engage in life differently because of the pandemic. It's specifically that they will engage in life based around things that will specifically affect the supply chain. That's the important thing to notice. Consumer demand is expected to remain strong throughout 2021. The problem with that is that many supply chains, they're struggling with the fact that they are unable to meet this consumer demand, particularly as that demand shifts to an online demand. There are still limitations on production. There are limitations on manufacturing growth, and there are a lot of inefficiencies that were brought on by the pandemic. And so we have an imbalance, right? Consumer demand is strong, but the supply chain is not able to meet those demands in the way that manufacturers would necessarily want. And that creates some issues when we start talking about counterfeiting. And so the main issue is, the supply-demand gap. Now, anyone who's taken a basic economics course, we're familiar with the supply-demand curve, and I know that this is intentionally very simplistic, and we know that perfect relationships do not exist. But the fact remains that let's just use this as an example. So if we think about this as the supply and demand curve pre-pandemic, this is our example. Now, what we know is that during the pandemic, what we saw was that COVID suppressed the supplies of certain goods. Now, this is not only due to the fact that, say, for PPE, personal protective equipment, or goods that were important to the medical industry, that the supplies got sucked up because they were used at a rate much faster than what manufacturers anticipated and what the supply chain could replenish, right? Also, we had a growth in certain consumer items because people were at home more, they were doing more home networking or home working. And so things like computers, wireless cameras, Wi-Fi equipment, all of those, right? Supply chain got exhausted, right? So it suppressed supplies of certain goods. At the same time, right, consumer demand hasn't waned for certain goods. As a matter of fact, it's actually grown for certain goods. And so demand has increased as supply has decreased. And we know that this naturally creates a gap within which counterfeiters will operate. Now, these gaps are natural, right? We've seen this prior to the pandemic, that counterfeiters exploit that gap between consumer demand and existing supply. Luxury goods are the best example of this, where luxury goods and luxury brands create natural gaps as part of their brand management strategy. But the supply chains are really where we'll see the first signs of these gaps emerging, because we'll see that lag or those shortages within the supply chain. Counterfeiters, again, they're going to latch onto this, and this is where they are going to play. The problem, again, as was mentioned in the previous slides, is that after the pandemic is done, consumer demand is going to stay about where it is, if not grow. And the manufacturing challenges that exist and the delays in the global supply chain that are going to occur because of how the impacts of COVID have been delayed around the world are going to mean that this green area, this gap within which counterfeiters are operating, is going to be very, very stable. And so from a government's perspective, from customs agencies, from free trade zones, supply chain intermediaries, brand owners, the question is, what do we need to do to address this gap to make sure that counterfeiters are not taking advantage of this to the extent that we know they would all like to? So this supply demand gap. Again, counterfeiters, right, they have for a long period of time taken advantage of lagging supply relative to consumer demand. It's an easy space for them to jump into. Generally, before COVID, this was the result of supply chain hiccups, right? So you have a blockage in the Suez Canal. You have a crane that goes down at a port, and so container ships cannot get unloaded fast enough. Or purposeful constraint, as was mentioned with the luxury goods, or a bubble in demand. So highly desired good gets launched. There's a lot of demand for it, more than the manufacturers expected, or more than could be moved through the legitimate supply chain, right? And so counterfeiters took advantage of that. Supply chain responses and anti-counterfeiting responses, we were familiar with these issues. And so we kind of knew that when those would come onto the radar screen, we would have a certain set of responses that we could apply to them. Well, that was prior to COVID. During COVID, that has changed. And one of the big reasons why that has changed is consumer complicity. Now, consumer complicity is the willful purchase of counterfeit products. And consumer complicity also creates demand for counterfeits, and it increases the flow of illegitimate goods through the legitimate supply chain. And one of the trends that we've noticed as we at the center have been doing a lot of our research over the pandemic is that the amount of videos and the amount of people who are pushing illegitimate goods, particularly through social media, but through e-commerce generally, has seen an uptick, right? So people who are at home, who have disposable income, right, they're buying up a lot of illegitimate goods they know to be reps or dupes, counterfeit items, which is increasing the flow of counterfeit goods, illegitimate goods, through the legitimate supply chain. Why is that important? Well, because the supply chain has reduced capacity right now, as illegitimate products suck up that capacity or take the place of legitimate goods, it means there's less space for legitimate goods that are there to move through the system, right? So greater challenges. Add on to this the fact that COVID-19 has caused shortages of in-demand goods, virus-related projects, and it's led to strains on the supply chain, and that gap is going to grow. So let's say, though, that COVID-19 was not all bad. And there's some takeaways that we have to this. And I'm going to temper this statement in a second, but COVID-19 was not all bad. The substantial decline in air travel meant that customs agencies could focus more on seizing illicit goods that were moving across borders. The question is, after COVID, will those lessons persist? Will they continue, right? And I think that we need to be vigilant in pushing for a continuation of those activities once COVID fully lifts. We've seen in the US that air travel has now started to exceed pre-pandemic levels, right? We need to make sure that customs agencies have the resources to maintain the vigilance that they had during the pandemic. The US example, US Customs and Border Protection, they have seized record numbers of counterfeits and illicit drugs crossing the borders here in the US. I think some of the numbers have suggested that in the first quarter of this year, we've seized more fentanyl than in all of last year. There's been a heightened focus on consumer health and safety as counterfeit goods have entered the market. Very, very important, and something that, again, should maintain and continue. As there's been contraction in the physical retail space, there's been consolidation of counterfeiters' activities in the online space, meaning that there's more counterfeiters out there. We know where they're going. We can see the path forward. We can start to anticipate where they're going to go and hopefully put in place some good anti-counterfeiting activities, which should be addressed by some emerging public-private partnerships. But again, COVID was still very bad, right? So there are a number of people, right, who have been moving online, and they gave counterfeiters a whole range of new victims to target. The shift to e-commerce has led to trends in consumer buying behavior that are going to stick around once a pandemic is passed. Again, the increase of willingly buying counterfeits and the number of people online has to be addressed because current anti-counterfeiting activities and strategies don't account for that. And then finally, the fact is that this pandemic has highlighted the fact that counterfeiters have taken advantage of the fact that consumers are not really good at protecting themselves from victimization. Consumers lack the knowledge and information necessary to determine legitimate from fake. And so because they lack that knowledge, we as the brand owner community, as the stakeholders in this world, have the responsibility to make sure that we protect them. Now, supply chain shortages will persist, right? And moving through the pandemic, we're not going to see immediate return to normalcy, right? COVID's impact on manufacturing capacity is going to lead to long-term shortages in essential and high-demand products. Stockpiles of PPE, this is important, right? They're not expected to return to pre-pandemic levels for several years. We're talking like 4 or 5 years until we see them return to pre-pandemic levels. Chip shortages, we've all seen this across the globe. Microprocessors, likely not going to come back in the automotive and appliance market for 18 months. What's going to fill that gap? Right? Potential for counterfeits. These shortages, again, are going to exacerbate that natural supply-demand gap that counterfeiters are going to exploit. Demand's going to remain stable or grow, and we'll go brief U.S. example here to kind of finish up. All right. Unemployment in the U.S. at least is relatively low, and part of that is because the economy is growing, but we also still see a lot of people who are still on enhanced unemployment benefits because of the pandemic. They will then move into jobs that pay more than they did pre-pandemic, so they're going to have more disposable income. The US in probably 18 months or so, if not a little bit sooner, is going to face a mild foreclosure or eviction crisis. But what we've seen is that there have not been as many homes for sale on the market. And so a lot of people have been making substantial improvements to their homes. Now, this is important when we think about supply chain shortages for appliances and other goods that have microprocessors, right? Consumers have money to spend. They want to spend it on home improvement because they're not buying new homes. They want to buy these products. If the natural supply chain doesn't have the products to fill it, they're shopping more online. The inability to determine legitimate from illegitimate goods means they are at risk. Right? A return to in-person activities, professional and collegiate sporting events, the Olympics coming up means that there's going to be demand for apparel and consumables that manufacturers may not be able to meet because manufacturing capacity is still limited, the supply chain is still limited. All of this means, right, that consumers and potentially some manufacturers, they're going to be a lot less picky about the sources of supply and the sellers that they go to when they start buying their products. And they're ultimately going to have to weigh this question of, do I delay making a purchase? Do I not buy this product? Or do I get this thing that I really, really want or believe that I need? The research has shown that most people are not going to delay that gratification. They're going to buy a product and they will search online environments to find the products that they want. Leading them to buy risky products, those products have to move throughout the supply chain. And as customs, again, law enforcement, brand owners, we need to be aware of the fact that these goods are going to start moving around the globe. And we know that counterfeit goods are going to be on the uptick. So if we know it's coming, what do we do about it? Right? In essence, we need to evolve our anti-counterfeiting strategy. Right? It has to continue to evolve as we shift out of the pandemic, knowing that these consumer trends are going to drive counterfeiting activities. Public-private partnerships have grown. They're a great platform for collaboration, data sharing, and information sharing. We need to support those and leverage the trends that can be pulled out of those. There's been an increase in platform-driven litigation. This may signal a significant shift in the way in which we approach anti-counterfeiting, and that may squeeze counterfeiters, or it may not. They may pivot. But this legislative approach, this platform-driven litigation, is a great trend that we need to continue to support. We need to take advantage of the technological changes, particularly in socio-technical applications, and how that's going to offer opportunities for counterfeiters, as well as brand protection. All right? And then as supply chains come back to the pre-pandemic state, we have an opportunity to start to build in unique anti-counterfeiting interventions to those processes and operations. We're going to see changes in those processes. We're going to see changes in the operation. Can we put anti-counterfeiting more on the front page? That's all I have for today. Thank you very, very much for taking the time. And I believe we've left some time for question and answer if there are any.
Yep, Jay, thanks for your presentation. I think you have highlighted some key issues on the revolution of supply chain after the COVID pandemic. The key question will still be the online and the e-commerce and how consumers will look into e-commerce, and will the same trends stay in the future, or will consumers return back to the normal retail? I don't think so. Once you try the online, I think it's very convenient. I don't think anyone wants to go retail anymore. But yeah, I think we could take some questions. If anyone of the attendees have any questions, please drop it in the Q&A box, because I think we have 5 more minutes. If you also have anything to highlight, an extra thing to highlight, please.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that last point about consumers going into the online space. And that's something, again, we really need to pay attention to. And one of the key tips, or I guess one of the key takeaways we can watch is, as new social trends develop in the online space, on social media, on YouTube, right? As consumers will tell you what they want. They'll tell you how they want to get products. They'll tell you what's coming in demand. And we need to be watching that and be not only responsive to that, but think about things from the counterfeiters, right? They're very good marketers. They're watching this and following the things that are going on. And we need to think about this not only from the perspective of how do I meet consumer demand, but how are the counterfeiters planning to meet consumer demand?
Yep.
And if they're planning to do that, and they don't have the same overhead issues I have, they don't have the same moral and ethical boundaries as I have, how do we address that? Right? Darcy, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. The question is, what are the e-commerce platforms doing in anticipation of this increase of counterfeits on e-commerce? Are they open to cooperation in the future? warnings to consumers, banners, or taking on any kind of intermediary liability or responsibility for knowing their customers? So are they open to discussing with brand owners more so than in the past?
Great question. What I have seen is that there are a range of different approaches when we say e-commerce, and a range of different activities. So we'll talk about the good. There are a host of e-commerce platforms that are doing exactly what you mentioned, right? They're talking about banner ads. They're talking about algorithms that will send consumers targeted messaging when someone types in replica Louis Vuitton purse or something like that. The litigation that I've mentioned, obviously, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the fact that Amazon and Facebook have filed lawsuits with brands on to target social media influencers. The information sharing is something that's developing as well. So platforms are starting to put together the initial pieces of information sharing so that they can share information with each other and with law enforcement about bad actors that are acting across their platforms. And then, of course, there's pending legislation in the US. That legislation is being mirrored in the EU, as well as in some Latin American countries, although the rights environment in Latin America is a little bit different, that I think is going to shape the ways in which brands view their responsibility, but also the legal environment around their responsibility for the transparency of sellers and seller information online. All of these things are at very initial stages, and we ultimately have to wait to see what the impact is going to be, right? So it's great that Amazon CCU and that Facebook are out there doing lawsuits against counterfeiters and things like that. What's the impact of that going to be? I don't know, right? And I don't think they know yet as well. What's the impact of data and information sharing going to be? That's a great question when we talk about that in the US, but what's that going to look like in the EU when we've got GDPR, right? What can really be shared when we're talking about bad actors? What is the impact of the Informed Consumers and the Shop Safe Act going to be when we have privacy concerns for very small sellers, SMEs, who operate out of their homes? Do they have to share that information? So I think there are a lot of very good potential items on the books. What's going to shake out and be effective? Unfortunately, we got to kind of wait and see. The difficult thing in this, and I think to get to the heart of your question, is there are some platforms that are very resistant to a lot of these efforts. And how do we get those platforms on board with doing the right thing? I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Your perspective from Crop Life. You cover a lot of brands that have a vested interest in stopping platforms from selling a lot of these goods, and I'm sure you've got a lot of brands that have had pushback from platforms. So I'd love to hear your members' take on this as well.
Well, we're kind of interested. I think some certain platforms have banned, if I understand it, Alibaba has banned the sale of all medicines, if I remember the media correctly. I mean, is that true? And if so, what motivated Alibaba to do that, to ban the sale of all medicines? Were they just, and maybe we don't know, but.
So I can't say specifically, but I remember hearing that as well. In the last conversation that I remember hearing, it was framed from the perspective of this is just not a market wherein we want to play. Now we can frame that ethically and say, you know what, there are just too many opportunities for counterfeits to get into the market. You could also frame it from the perspective of this is a very difficult thing to get right. You're a Chinese-based e-commerce platform that is operating all over the world, and the regulatory environment for pharmaceuticals, right? We know it is very, very difficult to handle. And from a business risk perspective, if you know that you are touching all of these different countries with all of these different rights environments, just look at the US alone with the Drug Supply Chain Security Act coming into development and the requirements that's placing on brand owners. Managing that internally, that's very, very difficult to do, right? And so the easy thing to do is just say, we're not going to play in this market. And what I think they're really saying is, we're not going to play in this market right now until things really get figured out. That's really what I think they're saying.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
I think we have one more question from someone from the attendees. I can ask to unmute. Luke from ACFA, Luke Bruniel from ACFA. I think, Luke, you can unmute if you're still here.
Oh, yeah, I see.
I just, because he raised his hand, so I'm allowing him to unmute, but I think, Luke, can you hear me? You can unmute if you have a question.
I don't have a question at this moment in time, Ibrahim. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Okay. He's probably figuring out how to raise his hand. All right. I think, Jay, thanks for being with us today, and thanks for sharing this insightful presentation. We could definitely move on to the second presenter and second session for today, which will be, Paul Vitali from Verify Me. So Paul is an experienced international business development professional with a driven entrepreneurial attitude towards business growth, having worked with startups, SMEs, and large corporates and government agencies for over 25 years. Currently, he's located in Zug, Switzerland for the last 4 years. And with a good knowledge of supply chain, track and trace, and blockchain technology, he was appointed in March 2020 by Verify Me as the VP of Business Development for the EMEA and Asia Pacific region. So he looks after helping build partnerships, build distribution and reseller network for the company. He is now overseeing a team located in the UK, Central and Northern Europe, Africa, India, Pakistan, Malaysia, and China. So quite a big team, Bob. I think you can take over the virtual stage for now.
Great. Thanks very much, Azim. Great introduction. I'd even employ myself with that introduction. That's really good. Thank you. And a great opening presentation as well. Thanks very much. Really enjoyed that. It was a good start to the event. Pleasure to be here, of course. We like supporting these events. You do a very good job. So yeah, let's talk about counterfeit again and brand protection. That's what Verify Me is all about. If I can share my screen here.
Yep.
Yeah. Just let me know if you're seeing this, everybody.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'll just go into full presentation mode.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, as I've been with the company, as Hazim said, just 14, 15 months, and really overseeing the expansion program into the EMEA and Asia Pacific regions. You know, in these current times, as we've just had from the first presentation, you know, it is troubling times post COVID. The opportunities for counterfeiters to establish themselves more in the marketplace is becoming more and more prominent. We were just looking at some statistics the other day, and we just put them here. You know, counterfeit looks like it's going to be the 6th biggest economy in the world. It's a problem we're all facing. $2.8 trillion worth of counterfeit goods sold worldwide this year. And we know from experience that some brands are experiencing up to 30% counterfeit issues. I mean, the brands will be working very hard to offset their competition, to stay ahead of the game, to innovate their products, to sort out their supply chains. But if they've got a 30% counterfeit problem, that's their biggest competition that they're facing. And obviously they're going to need to do something about that. We do feel that innovation is the key to this. It's a constantly developing marketplace, if you like. As Jay mentioned, you know, counterfeiters are smart. They're intelligent people. They're coming up with innovative ideas, how to divert products, how to counterfeit products, how to refill containers, use existing packaging, copying labels, copying serialization. It's a very difficult world in which we live. You know, companies have to be smarter than them to outdo the counterfeiters. And we hope that we play a reasonable part in that, in trying to help those brands outsmart the counterfeiters and diverters. By doing that, we want to try and change dumb packaging into smart packaging, so we can do something with it, so we can communicate with consumers, so we can protect brands, so we can make sure that serialization on a product is genuine, that it can be tracked, it can be traced. And that's what our technology is all about. So what I'm going to do is quickly run through company intro. Just take on the next slide. We're going to recap on our tech solutions. Some of the people on this on the event today will have heard from us before, so I'm just going to do a quick recap on our technical solutions. We're going to touch on a couple of case studies on different print methodologies, and then just talk about those new innovations where we feel that is hopefully going to try and help brands stay ahead of the counterfeiters. Excuse me. So briefly, for those that have never met us before, we're based out of Rochester, New York. We're brand protection, track and trace, and consumer engagement specialists. We've been around for quite a while, but we had a revamp of our technology in 2017, and where our main production is of an organic earth pigment, an IR earth pigment, that if I was sitting here with you today would be a fluorescent powder that I would shake in a little container. But you've got to think about what you can then do with that specialist pigment. It's a very highly controlled supply chain. So we partner with a number of different people, and I'll jump into those partnerships in a second, but it's what you can then do with that to help combat counterfeit. Yes, as he mentioned, I'm based here in Switzerland. Fortunate enough as a company, sorry, I could just note that I'm looking after staff now in 7 countries internationally. So we've had a good expansion program over this last 12, 18 months. We're a NASDAQ registered company. We're fortunate in the height of the pandemic to get a uplisting onto NASDAQ. We've raised just short of $20 million to help with some accretive acquisitions in our expansion program, and global partners in many countries, as we've mentioned already. Our main target sectors: consumer goods, nutraceuticals, food and beverage, and the legalized THC, cannabis, and hemp industries. And our technology is patented, patent granted, that is. It's to protect brands and consumers, and that is a unique global solution. The technical overview, if you like: we're using codes and serialization, we're using specialist inks, high security invisible pigments, we're using specialist labels and tamper evident labels, and then we have some hardware as well, the Verify Checker and the Verify Authenticator, again patented hardware, and we have some very important world-class partners that we're working very closely with, some of whom you will know, and some that I will be able to introduce to you a little later in the presentation. So we start with our authentication and our anti-counterfeit presence, and what we can do to try and help brands and organizations. We do have a digital arm that Darcy just touched on it a second ago about the online and the web counterfeit that we do appreciate is going to increase as more and more products are sold online. So we do have a digital platform that monitors websites and marketplaces and numerous sales platforms. And what we attempt to do with that is a kind of a 2 to 3 month analysis where we'll create a landscape analysis, if you like, of your products, where they've been sold and where those counterfeit issues are. And then we can help you instigate proceedings to take down those sites. And we're working with a number of brands internationally on that analysis. And that helps us create, that analysis and assessment helps us create a solution. So we then move into the physical side of things. And the first thing that we would do is, on any kind of packaging or labeling, we would introduce unique variable codes. Now, I know a number of brand protection companies do exactly the same as this, and it is the first stage that we all tend to do. It offers a degree of anti-counterfeit and authentication. And if we were just looking at, I don't know if you can still see me on screen as well, but we're looking at, you know, a simple label like this, you would see that laying down of a unique visible code and with the code being variable, it does mean that when that code is scanned, if it's scanned in the wrong region or the wrong country, or it's scanned too many times, it does trigger a series of alerts that allows the brand to make changes to the back-end information that is received when those codes are scanned. And that, if you like, is the first level of security that we offer. The second level, what I would quickly do here is just, if I unshare my screen just for a second, and I'll show you in a format here directly. If we've got a label such as this that you can see on the camera, that we're laying down a variable unique code here. But the good thing, the specialist thing is around what we do here. In this yellow block here, you've got invisible pigment laid down, where if I use my authenticator and come over that code, you will see, you might not hear the noise. That is a very high intense beep that you hear when you heard it. Okay, great. So yeah, that's laid down. I mean, this label is actually laid down by a digital print press in a single pass. Variable unique code, it's in reverse. I keep pointing to the wrong side. The label's in reverse. And then invisible mark right here in the corner, completely invisible to the naked eye. The next step from that would be to be able to actually read that code. So what I'm going to do here is quickly share my phone with you. We should see this, hopefully. I'm just going to log in. And this just takes a couple of seconds if you just bear with me. So part of our patented tech is the ability to not only detect that code with this unique beeper and checker device, and just to know that the latest developments with this is now connected through the app that allows us to, when those inspections are done, very fast inspections of products, that is tracked globally and mapped on a global dashboard. So we have who the inspector is, what the product is that is being inspected, and then we track that on a global dashboard. So that's quite unique in what we do. Let me just quickly log in here, if you just bear with me.
Sorry, Paul, have you shared your screen already?
Sorry, let me go back to screen share now. Thanks, Hazim, for the prompt. So everybody should see my screen again now. You see my phone. Okay, so here we go. It's asking me to authenticate the visible code, which I do from that label. It's saying at this stage the code is in the right region. It's not been scanned too many times. It's a genuine code. But it's now telling me there's an invisible code on this label. It's showing me where the code is. I now move into the scan, and I'll do it very slowly, but you can do this very quickly actually. So you'll see as I block out the ambient light, the IR code just pops up, is fluoresced using the authenticator, and the code is read. Now the beauty of that is all that is tracked on the back end on a global dashboard, and I'll be able to show you segments of that shortly. Now if I just go back to my main presentation. Hazim, has it jumped back to my presentation now, or am I still on mobile?
Yeah, you're on the slides now.
Super. Let me go to a full presentation again. So those are the three phases of just to recap on our technology. Variable overt technology and codes for variable codes and marks for serialization, with then an ability to check the presence of an invisible ink and pigment in that label or packaging that is there, it can be tracked. And then but the ability then to lay down variable, unique codes that can be read using the authenticator that pretty much wipes out counterfeit and diversion. Now, bearing in mind, the reason we use IR is because it has a light fastness, means that a light fastness in excess of 10 to 15 years, it won't degrade over time, that often UV inks are prone to. So we think that's a really important issue. It has a very highly controlled supply chain, and when combined with the checker and the authenticator is a unique patented solution. Going back to those variable codes, we have a track and trace element to those variable codes. So those various touch points through the supply chain, as long as those are honored, you can track that code all the way through to the end user. So there's a very highly controlled track and trace element to this. We're working with a couple of brands where we're tracking from seed all the way through to sale. And that is very important for some brands. The engagement part of our solution means that for consumers to actually scan a visible code and interpret that code and be given information on that product, user instructions or ingredients of a product, maybe access to video for cross-selling or links out to websites, or for consumer engagement, for feedback on a product that they're actually using. And if anybody here, whilst they can see this screen, whilst they see this particular slide on their screens, if you had your mobile phone, you could just simply scan that code. That's a live code. Will take you to a live product. You can authenticate that product, and you can be taken on a journey. And every one of those scans would be tracked on a global dashboard. So, did you need to perhaps just see that again, Hazim? Would it? Let me just push that back for you, so you can scan that. You can scan that code. And once you, thank you. And once you press authenticate, you can the engagement platform will allow the consumer to look through the range of products, information about that product, as I say. All those scans for the brand are tracked on a global dashboard in real time. You can see where any triggers are, any anomalies, and then you can lock down certain codes if there does tend to be anomalies in certain regions. This quickly is a case study with Push Products based out in California. They're using unique variable serialization codes. They've got a 24% scan rate on their product. And we detected an issue in China with codes being scanned there. We can very quickly lock those codes down, change the messaging that is received, and we stop the counterfeiters in their tracks. And they're not using track and trace, they're simply using the authenticate and the engagement part of our solution. And their actual solution or labeling, they didn't want to change the packaging on any product, so we used a tamper evident label with a scratch off, and that is a gold foil label that has a void on removal, but you have to scratch off as well, so encouraging the scratch off to read the code underneath to authenticate the products. That's a really powerful solution for them. This is a small company that already has received over 41,000 scans on their products, so they're engaging with all that audience presently. So a really powerful side of the business is the engagement piece. Going back to how we stay ahead of the competition, we've got to be constantly innovating and developing new technology. As I say, the crux of our solution is this manufacture and development of an IR organic earth pigment, and it's what we do with that that's important. Our partnership with HP Indigo, and for those who don't know, HP Indigo are the digital print press side of Hewlett-Packard, very large organization with thousands of print presses globally, working with thousands of print converters globally as well. And they've helped us develop an invisible security ink that slots straight and integrates without conversion into all the 6,000 and 7,000 digital presses, which they see as their main security presses in the print world. And it does mean that, as you saw from that label earlier, in a single pass, you can lay down visible and invisible codes and serialization. It's a very powerful way of doing it, and a very simple way of doing it. That's printed at high speed and can be done in vast quantities. We are currently developing the solution for their 20 and 30,000 presses for the large flexible packaging and large folded carton print presses. So that will be very innovative, and we feel that that's going to be online within the next 3 to 6 months. We've got a partnership with INX International, the part of the Cicada Group. They're the third largest ink manufacturer on the planet. And this enables us to develop other ink solutions for traditional, or should I say, non-digital print presses. So with just to tell you of another case study where we're actually printing a pigment spot ink, spot color ink on aluminium sheets that is then converted into the twist caps on the tops of bottles or wine bottles. But because the cap contains our pigment, they have an issue where bottles are recycled and different caps put on. They can authenticate very quickly that the cap and the label are have our pigment. We print on the printed label, but also on the aluminium cap as well, and that is detected using the beeper, and that is tracked globally. So it's a very interesting use case. But going on to my next point, as I've mentioned, that does mean that using these inks, traditional print presses are able to use the ink in exactly the same way as they would with any other inks that they have in their portfolio. Other than, and the result is just that the ink now contains an IR pigment that can be detected at our frequency. So which does mean that we can not only print on metals, but also plastics. And also we can incorporate that pigment into a manufacturing process. So even under intense heat and pressure, we've been able to include the pigment into metals and plastics, gaming chips, electrical switches, that kind of thing. And it does mean that the actual finished product that might look something like this would actually detect using our IR checker. So all very important innovations, the latest of which, I know that tamper-evident void labels have been around for a while, but incorporating invisible pigments and invisible variable codes into those tamper-evident labels has created a number of opportunities for us with brands to protect their products. And then more recently, we have now the ability to be able to print verify ink, that invisible ink, directly onto materials, labels, wash tags. So we're working very closely with the apparel industry now with innovative solutions to enable them to offer a true authentication solution to their customers and to their distributors and to their retailers, who can then are able to check for the presence of that invisible ink on those labels to authenticate products. Using actually HP Indigo, we're also able to print on heat stamp labels that, using then a heat press, can press it directly onto fabric or into the back of products and clothing. So not only do we provide the tags themselves pre-printed with variable codes and the invisible inks, but we can create the heat stamp labels with those variable marks and presence of ink as well. And finally, for high-speed production lines where you may have glass products or plastic products for oil containers or electrical components, printed circuit boards, we're able to lay that invisible ink directly using continuous inkjet on a high-speed production line to lay down invisible variable codes on those products. And that, as far as we know, is a completely unique solution for the industry. How are we doing for time, Hazim? I can't see my clock on my...
You got 5 minutes for the presentation, 5 minutes Q&A. You got some
Super.
questions?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So our final innovation, if you like, is the incorporation of what is known as a smart glyph into our portfolio. So with everything that I've just spoken about, we're talking about serialization, can be barcodes, serial numbers, QR codes, dot matrix, 2D dot matrix codes, can all be interpreted and read through smartphones and or devices. But what we've developed as well is we have a proprietary glyph called the smart glyph that enables, it adds another degree of security to products. You do need an app to read this proprietary glyph, but we have a trillion variations of the glyph, every single one unique, and we can lay that down digitally, and we can lay it down invisibly as well, and it can be detected through the authenticators. But what's also unique about the smart glyph and its technology and the back-end technology is it can augment and interpret any existing label. So if a company doesn't want to add a tamper evident label, doesn't want to change their packaging, but needs more protection and wants consumer engagement, then we can use the app technology to scan that existing code, authenticate it, and then take the customer on a journey with, just as you saw before when we scanned the QR code, be able to take the customer on a journey, build a loyalty program, and build a customer experience through the app. But that is, some brands prefer not to have their consumers download an app, and some are happy to. And if we can incorporate the app into the solution, then we've got a proprietary solution now that is available for brands to use. And that is simply the technology behind it. The consumer scans existing code, it encrypts and creates an access code, passes onto a server on a secure network, and the server checks that integrity, decrypts the information, and generates an access path for the data structure, and takes the customer on a journey in a secure, closed channel. So we're really excited about that. There's going to be more to come on that in the following weeks. And finally, just in summary, Verify Me, we're offering it's overt and covert anti-counterfeit solutions, unlimited reach to consumers, even using augmented authentication platform, and new avenues to drive customer loyalty, rewards, and repeat purchases, and a full supply chain visibility with seed to sale, track and trace. So that is all from me, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Hazim.
We have a couple of questions, but first we have an attendee who raised his hand. Is Danny? If I'll grant you to talk, Danny. If you have a question, you can ask Paul directly. I'm sure it's Danny still around. All right, until Danny comes, I think we have a question in Arabic, but I can translate it for you.
Okay.
He's asking basically that all the current security features that you have presented is currently available to be ordered online through Alibaba or some e-commerce that are offering this sort of technologies and holograms. So what are the guarantees that these the solutions that you are offering will not be duplicated or counterfeited itself?
Sure. And I think, an overt security feature, I agree, can be copied. If we are creating and generating an overt serialization code, a QR code or a smart glyph, obviously we are generating that code. It points to our databases, our secure servers. If that code is copied, but is then scanned in the wrong region, it triggers an alert immediately that would shut that down. If you want to buy, overt security features off from Alibaba and use those serialization solutions, then I understand that it could point at different servers. I mean, it is very difficult if you're only using overt. But they are unique codes to us, and with the smart glyph, a completely proprietary code only associated to us. So that can't be produced or read through the app by counterfeiters. But I think the real crux is getting into the invisible marks, and that's, you're going to hear lots, I'm sure, of other invisible covert features that are used through other protection agencies, other protection companies, and you'll hear those during the course of the next 2 days. But using those covert features, using IR pigment, not UV, but IR, that's got a very highly controlled supply chain, that is detected at a specific frequency, we feel that does offer a unique solution in the marketplace.
I think by his question, he wasn't only referring to other security solution providers, but the counterfeiters themselves could also purchase these commercially available security features and just replicate the same solutions that are in the market. How can the consumer differentiate between the authentic verification process and imitated verification process by the counterfeiter themselves?
Sure. I mean, if you're scanning an overt code and it takes you through to a fancy website, you need to check what the URL is of that website. It could be a similar code and it could point to a similar looking website. I appreciate that. So that's why you need layers 2, layers 3 on the solution. If the counterfeiters have succeeded in overcoming phase 1, we need to get some covert features added to that product, and that might be using labeling or direct printing, or but certainly adding the covert features is what is needed.
Yep. Thank you, Muhammad Ibrahim, representing the Egyptian Authority, for that question. I think we have one more question that we can quickly take. It's from an anonymous attendee. Can the IR code be detected by end user by using a smartphone?
No. So the solution is a patented solution. You need our technology to read that IR code, and that code could be a smart glyph code, serial number, dot matrix. We can lay those, whatever that code that might be, we can lay it down using the IR security inks, yes, but only detected using our devices.
Yeah. All right, I think we have one more question, but I'm not able to really understand. Hi, I'm Abdullah from Tanzania. A few days ago, I had bought 2 with the same brand owner, and when I scanned one of the scan failed to bring out effective information. So what can I do? I think I'm not sure if Bolt can assist you with what you can do. I think that you need to go back to the brand owner that you scanned. I'm not sure if you both can assist you with this.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I'm also not sure if this is directly related to you. I think it's more of a generic question. I think we have also Darcy has raised his hand. We can take one more. Last question, Darcy, if you have any question.
No, I forgot to put my hand down. Sorry. The last one.
No problem. All right. And okay, one final question from Debanjan Das. I can. Yep, yeah. Debanjan.
Hi, Ibrahim. Hi, Paul. This is Debanjan here. Basically, yeah. I asked the infrared question related to when I put it on the Q&A. So basically, this is mainly for the internal processes for that transparent QR code to be checked, or how we can implement for the end user authentication. Like if someone is looking for a
sure.
transparent QR code or infrared QR code.
Yeah, for end user, you're going to need overt features. Our IR features and covert features are for the brand themselves, for their inspectors. It could be done at a number of touch points. It could be for their distributors. Could be at at border control. Their distributors could even be done at retail as well, but it's for the brand to use the authenticators and checkers to alleviate and rectify any diversion issues that they've got or any counterfeit issues. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. I think we've covered all the questions. If you have any final thing that you would like to share.
No, I'm good there, Hazim. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
And hope the rest of the event goes well. And if there's any questions afterwards, then obviously I can always take them offline.
Yep. Thank you, Bo. Thanks for the insightful presentation and the interesting technologies that you always present to us.
Thank you.
I think we can move to the next session presented by David Francis, who is the Managing Director for the Alliance Against Counterfeit Spirits. All right, so David is the Managing Director of the Alliance Against Counterfeit Spirits, a joint venture company which represents some of the world's major international, sorry, my mic fell down. Some of the world's major international spirits producing companies. AACS has been in operation since the early 1990s with one single purpose: to combat the counterfeiting of distilled spirits brands wherever it occurs. So before joining AACS in 2018, David spent more than 20 years working for a number of large UK corporates, including Diageo, where he worked in a variety of global finance roles, including finance director for global travel retail for the Middle East and North Africa. And he's currently based in the United Kingdom. So thank you, David, for joining us. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you join me today for this session. Let me figure out how I do this. And great. Hopefully you can see the slides.
Could you possibly change the display settings?
Yeah, I think I might be able to do that. How do I do that?
The second, if you see the top bar, there's three options. The one in the middle, display setting.
Display settings.
Okay, you can slideshow again. You can slideshow one more time.
Yeah, sorry to be a bit of a technology dunce.
No worries. All right, then you have the taskbar on top, the show taskbar, display setting, and end slideshow.
No, I don't have that. Okay, I don't have that there. Let me share the screen like this. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, possible as well.
Let's just do it like this. Okay, so thanks everybody, and it's a pleasure to talk to you today. It's great to have you join us today. So as I think Hazim has said, the Alliance Against Counterfeit Spirits is a coalition really of the largest international spirits companies in the world: Bacardi, Brown-Forman, Diageo, Pernod, Edrington, and William Grants. And they come together to take a category level approach to anti-counterfeiting operations at the front end of the process. That's to say, we pool our resources to fight the bad guys and try and disrupt counterfeit wherever it may be in the world. And we do that by effectively engaging with investigative bodies around the world to stop counterfeiting at the point of production. So this is what we do. We focus uniquely on counterfeit. We don't look at parallel or at grey markets as such. We focus uniquely on counterfeit, and we do everything from training with authorities through to supporting investigations and inspections, formally identifying counterfeit, raising awareness, working with local law enforcement authorities, and critically, for the purposes of this conversation, working with e-commerce platforms to tackle counterfeiting there. My background, as Hazim has said, is not so much brand protection, more finance indeed. And so I'm going to give you today some observations on our experiences online in the last 12 to 18 months. Nothing scientific here, more observations and sharing of our experiences, and perhaps some of the learnings that we've taken from what we've seen over the course of the last 18 months, 2 years. So let me move on, and I'll talk uniquely really about spirits as we do that. Listen, I don't have to tell anyone on this call that before the pandemic, we were seeing, strong growth in online retail as opposed to offline retail. And clearly, the pandemic drove a huge spike in that. The graph you see on the left is the United Kingdom and the US moving into Q2 2020, and I think it tells the story, very well. Overall, UN trade development experts have noted that going into 2020, online sales were roughly 19% of total retail, up from 16% in 2019. So 3 points of growth share steal is huge, a dramatic change. What's interesting about that change is that it was driven principally by emerging markets. The greater shift to online over the course of the last 18 months has certainly been in emerging markets, where we've seen the strongest growth, and the weakest growth in online shifts have been in developed markets like Switzerland and Germany, where frankly more people were shopping online before the pandemic. So one of the big drivers when we think about counterfeit and consumer behavior through online is emerging markets. The second point that I would want to flag at this stage is that we've also seen an exponential shift in luxury purchasing online, something that was less prevalent before the pandemic, but things have certainly changed. And I think the FT, the Financial Times, noted during a recent kind of review that wealthy purchasing is now much more prevalent, and getting things delivered at home of high value much more prevalent than before the pandemic. Unsurprisingly, given that backdrop, counterfeiting activity has spiked too. This is a survey done by World Trademark Review, May-June 2020. And as you can see, roughly just over 50% of the answers to the question, have you noticed a change in counterfeit activity online during the COVID-19 outbreak, more than 50% of respondents said that they had significantly or slightly more. So this was early on in the pandemic, and we could already see that counterfeit activity was moving online at a fair pace. And when I think about my own industry, international spirits, I think there are a number of drivers that support this assertion. Consumer demand for online clearly grew. Remember, in spirits, we saw the closure of HoReCa, hospitality, bars, restaurants, hotels. And so a lot of purchasing of spirits, which is a fairly inelastic product, went online. In certain markets, South Africa, India, and elsewhere, we saw total prohibition. We see total prohibition now in South Africa. So, that drove as well innovative new routes to market. We saw home entertainment clearly a spike through a whole variety of different areas. One observation in the US, in the United States, the wine market pre-pandemic was tiny. It grew from about 600 million in 2019 to over 2 billion in 2020. So it grew up. So it's now pushing 3% of the total wine market, up from 1%. So you get a sense that the online imprint of drinks, wine in that case, but spirits as well, completely changed as things moved online, and home entertaining took the place of going out of an evening. Similarly, for counterfeiters, that demand created a fantastic opportunity. There are so many benefits to a counterfeiter to operating online. You have controlled interactions with your customer and consumer. You can manage the touch points and delivery. It's easy to reach your customers and consumers. Price points are easy to take lower, because generally speaking, customers and consumers are looking for bargains when they shop online. You can take payment ahead of delivery of goods through instant, payment platforms. You have scale. It's easy to list multiple times. It's frictionless to create accounts. You get geographic scale as well, because you can target different markets through different platforms. And lastly, of course, you could keep trading during the pandemic. Much of the old routes for counterfeiting through bars and restaurants were closed. And here was an opportunity to keep trading when so much of the market had closed down. So the opportunities for producers as well as the demand for consumers when it came to when it came to spirits and alcohol in general, really went up as we moved into the pandemic. So some observations then. You can see here that we've seen growth in online activity, both genuine and suspect, from 2020 to 21. And these results, as you can see, China, Southeast Asia, Africa, relative to Europe, kind of stacks up with what I mentioned from the UN report, that emerging markets saw, much more growth than some of the established markets. But even in those established markets, the numbers are pretty amazing. 25% growth in Europe in online sellers year on year, 2020 to 2021. What we've also seen, taking a global view, is the markets and the interactions with customers have changed significantly. As you can see here, in red 2019, pink 2020, and grey 2021. And I would highlight a couple of points. Traditional e-commerce marketplaces for engaging with consumers remain important, but globally, they've been overtaken, in our view, by Facebook Marketplace, which has become, fundamental to trading online in liquor. Yes, Taobao and 1688 remain important, but Facebook Marketplace has come from nowhere really when you look back to 2019 to really rule the roost. Secondly, and I think really importantly, when you look at 2021, you see how important closed groups are becoming. So WeChat and Telegram are good examples now of evolution in online activity. And we're seeing, more and more business online done through these harder to reach, more closely controlled closed group apps such as WeChat, Telegram, WhatsApp, and others. And this, when it comes to tackling counterfeit sales online, throw up a series of new problems that we need to address. The other point I want to share with you as we think about things from a spirits perspective is that B2B e-commerce has been growing very strongly indeed. When you think about spirits counterfeiting, pre-pandemic, a lot of what we used to see was traditional refilling. So the primary reason that people counterfeited a certain brand was that they had access to empty bottles coming out of bars, restaurants, nightclubs, and hotels. And so, really, it's those bottles that fueled the industry, and refill was the order of the day. However, during the pandemic, of course, that key source of glass, the critical piece of the puzzle when it comes to counterfeiting spirits, was no longer available at quantities required. And so, our belief is that counterfeiters locally looked elsewhere to supply that critical piece of the puzzle, the bottle. And what we've seen year on year is, huge growth in B2B e-commerce, selling things like bottles, labels, caps, and glass. That's a critical piece that's unique to our industry, and a big change, I think, as a result of the pandemic. What we've also seen is that those B2B marketplaces are having a real global impact on counterfeiting. And this slide gives you a flavor of where we started finding Chinese produced dry goods, labels, caps, and bottles turning up around the world. And this is also forcing us to rethink how we tackle counterfeit as a result of B2B marketplaces. You can see here that we've had, bottles and caps turning up in the Caribbean, in West Africa, in East Africa, in Europe, through the Middle East, into Southeast Asia, and elsewhere too. Just this week, we've been looking at, again, at West Africa, Togo and Nigeria, where we're seeing labels imported from China through B2B marketplaces. So the industry is really changing very quickly. So what have we been doing to tackle that? Well, we've broadened the scope and the depth of our online activity. We are triaging thousands and thousands of social media and e-commerce listings through B2B and B2C. We're looking farther afield, and we're looking deeper, and we're working across more platforms than ever. And I want to share with you just some of the examples of how we do this. So here we're looking for high-risk keywords: original liquor, the real product, all good stuff, excellent pricing, genuine. These are some of the things that we're looking for when we're scraping online. Here we're looking for crazy low pricing. In the liquor world, it can be difficult to distinguish between parallel and smuggled goods and genuine counterfeit, but we tend to find that counterfeit pricing is even lower. So we're working with our technology partners to find all these examples of low pricing and investigate further. And here you see 3 examples from China: Pinduoduo, Taobao, and WeChat on the left-hand side, really interestingly. Here we see variations in trade dress, different label fill levels, different kind of weird labeling here, inconsistent fills, label alignment wrong again, caps and neck dressing looking strange. These are 2 examples from Latin America on Facebook. Here, another flag that we look out for is really large quantities available. This is a Mercado Libre example from Peru and a 1688 from China, where they're both advertising really large quantities that to us would appear strange. So we look out for those as well. Here, where we see blurred or obscured labels, it's another indication for us that there's potentially, bad packaging, used packaging, and therefore potential counterfeit. Mexico, Costa Rica, and China all giving us examples here. So these are some of the key things we're using technology to consistently look out for as we attack the online space. And then lastly, a couple more random products. You can see from Gigi in Nigeria on the right-hand side, some strange stuff. Shoes, Mexico, Coke bottles randomly turning up. And what we've seen in Brazil recently with Jack Daniels is examples of products, innovations that haven't even been made by the actual brand owner yet. Some of these guys are so good online, they're coming up with flavors that don't even exist in the real world as yet. So we're looking for these kind of random things as well. And then lastly, negative reviews, clearly a big indicator. We find these less, but here you can find 2 examples, one from Shopee in Indonesia, one from Taobao in China. Lots of things online that we're continuing to work for, and hopefully you get a sense of scale, spread, and geographical focus. So what do we do with all that information? Well, increasingly, we need to move those listings offline, because indeed it's in the offline world that you tackle these guys. So from the triage process, we build relationships with the vendors, we get into dialogue. Indeed, we make purchases, we validate those purchases, and we look to track back and get them delivered, and then we look to track back to the individual producers. So one of the challenges I think we've had in COVID land has been difficulty converting the online to offline enforcement, because law enforcement and others have been busy elsewhere, and it's been challenging. But increasingly, we need to convert those e-listings through to payments for product, which we validate, and then we tackle offline. And so, even though there's an overwhelming amount of stuff online these days, it still comes back to offline enforcement. And I think the other area that we've got better at over time has been figuring out how different listings join together, because and where they're coming from. So what we see online, of course, is scale of listings, but they often track back to the same vendor. So we're constantly looking for keys that track us back to the same people, phone numbers, addresses, relationships between different websites and the information that's involved. So we're continuing to improve the way we investigate online to offline. Consumer education remains more important than ever. Here on the left-hand side, you can see a kind of old example of what you might look for physically: fill levels, caps, debris in the bottle, labels not being so good. But of course, in an online world, this becomes much more difficult. And increasingly, we're talking to consumers and customers about different kind of indicators: poor reviews, low pricing, location of different platforms, pictures, some of the messaging you see, payments and refunds. Are you using legitimate channels to do that kind of stuff? So one of the key things we're doing more and more now is educating customers and consumers about how to stay safe online. This is something else that we've taken on to tackle the closed marketplaces, and is an opportunity for us. Micro-tasking. we're lucky enough to be working with a partner in China that has a community of WeChat users that we can engage in to do work on our behalf, engage with potential counterfeiters, join groups, and help us understand what's really going on. So we're able to set challenges and tasks that encourage our micro-tasking community to look for counterfeit, engage with closed groups, get involved, and bring those leads to us so that we can tackle them. And this is becoming a really important way that we're starting to penetrate some of the closed groups that we see now across WeChat and other closed group platforms such as WhatsApp too. So we're looking constantly for new ways of tackling what is a continually moving target. And then, of course, we're working more closely than ever with the platforms that are out there. Facebook and Instagram, the most high risk. 36% of our sellers in 2020 were on those two platforms, and we're working increasingly closely with them. Alibaba is critical in China, and through our brand owners, we are increasingly leaning into their anti-counterfeiting alliance and pursuing sellers down that route as well. And lastly, we have really ramped up the amount of takedown activity that we're doing to disrupt and cause problems for the vendors that keep coming back. This is a constant effort on our part, and we're looking to continue to automate and make takedowns happen and be as disruptive as possible. And then lastly, we're thinking increasingly globally. I talked about our need to engage and stop and block the explosion in dry goods, caps, bottles, labels that are moving around the world now. And so we're engaging with customs organizations more and more to upskill, uptrain, and make sure that people are aware that it's not just full finished bottles that we're looking for these days smuggled in, but indeed it's the importing of caps and components and bottles that lead to in-market counterfeiting and the loss of revenues at that level. So we're changing the conversations with customs organizations to partner bigger and more effectively to pursue dry goods that are moving around the world and facilitating local in-market counterfeiting. That was a quick whistle-stop tour of what's been happening in the world of spirits online throughout the pandemic. I hope it made some kind of sense and gives you an understanding of what we've been doing and how things are moving incredibly quickly. With that, Hazem, I'll pause and I'm very happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, David, for the insightful presentation. I think it was very important to highlight to the participants the sort of advertisements and how counterfeit liquor is being sold online. I mean, I myself as a consumer have witnessed so many Facebook sponsored ads where the deal is too good to be true, like 4 bottles for the same price and so on. And surprisingly, you can actually see a good level of interaction on such posts. So it's key to share awareness, raise awareness on such issues. Consumers need to be educated on what are the red flags and how can you identify them. So it's really critical. I think we have one question. One participant raised their hand, Veronica. I will allow you to talk. If you are here, Veronica. Hello, Veronica. Can you hear me? All right, I think Veronica is not here, but all right. I think one of the challenges is how quick is it for counterfeiters to relist all these products again? Because after all, doing a website has become very easy, and I think doing a website is becoming more and more easier with all the online tools that can be utilized nowadays. So, I mean, how can brands continuously keep taking down all these listings? I think it will never end.
And I think, you know, we try and run a dual approach. So we try and be disruptive with takedowns, but equally, you know, we are using online as a large source of offline lead generation. So the challenge, you know, that we're faced with these days is how you triage a large number of listings to find the individual, you know, to find the source, find the individual, and then tackle that individual or that organization offline. So that's something that we continue to work with. And so you know, the only way that you can really make a difference is by tackling these guys offline and seeing online as a source of intelligence and leads that you can pursue. And that's the first thing that we do. The second thing, of course, is that we try and be disruptive by takedowns. But yes, you're right that only has a certain benefit. And then the third thing is to continue to strengthen the alliances with the platform hosts so that they help work with us to be more vigilant and support our efforts in stopping these listings coming in the first place. So I think we've made real progress in the last area, but we clearly have a lot more to do. And I think, you know, critically, we see that the trends change over time. So the move to Facebook Marketplace throws up a whole new series of challenges for Facebook in terms of how do they manage that. Equally, the move to use of WhatsApp and WeChat again throws up a whole different series of challenges, and we're only starting to address those with the providers of those platforms now. So we have a long way to go. We still predominantly use online as a source of offline lead generation so that we can target the actual counterfeiters.
Yep. We have one more question from Andrew Manley. I can answer this live. He's asking, I presume you are working with Verify Me. Do you reach out to buddies like mine, brackets AIPIA, to discuss and develop strategies to help with anti-counterfeiting? I believe AIPIA is the International Packaging Organization. It's related to packaging.
Well, as an alliance, we tend to focus on tackling the problem at source. Individual brand owners that sit behind the alliance tend to be developing their own packaging anti-counterfeit strategies, some of which they share across the alliance, some of which they don't, depending on how things on their own strategy. So if I'm being honest, at the alliance level, we tend to engage less, and we tend to focus more on directly combating the individual counterfeiters. It's really at the brand level that those packaging strategies are developed and managed.
Yep, fantastic. All right, I think that we've covered all the questions. If we have any more questions, you can quickly drop it in the Q&A or raise your hand. I'll permit you to speak. If not, I think we can move to our fourth session for the day. Allow me to take over the screen sharing, David.
Please do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, David, so much for the insightful presentation. Moving next, our fourth session for the day will be presented by Elke Bischel, who is the CEO for Riskotech. She is a former global head of risk management, having worked for some of the largest banks in the world in London, Frankfurt, and Singapore. She held several global director positions at group level that included investment banking, private banking, and retail banking. She also worked for the European Central Bank during the time of Eastern Europe country accessions. Her core expertise is in risk management, credit risk, data analytics, operational risk, and financial crime risk. Elke, I think you can take over the virtual stage that we have.
Cool. Thank you very much, Hazim, for the nice introduction.
Thank you.
I am delighted to meet everyone, and really looking forward for this conference. I've been listening to the other presenters, which was very interesting to hear. So that's really good. So you can see my screen, I'm sure. It is loading.
Yep.
So my company is Riskotech. Risiko is a German word for risk. And we are in the business of detecting financial crime. And our method is knowing what to look for. So we become educated into figuring out what is it that we're specifically looking for. And for that, there's various typologies and methods that one can bring in. So we specialize in the detection of counterfeits and the illicit markets investigations going with it. And we are less on the side of stopping the sales of the counterfeits, but more on who is it, who is behind it. And this is our area of expertise. So our team, so we're the company is 3 years old. We're 7 full-time staff and some contracting people. My background is banking. So I left my global banking career as a global head for risk management, and the area of expertise is sort of data analytics and financial and credit risk. I've won some awards, which I'm proud of, but you don't need to know. And with me is my my CIO, Chief Intelligence Officer, Richard Carrick, and he's also a former banker, and he was overseeing the function in financial crime for his previous employers in a large international bank. He's also, like myself, keynote speaker at various conferences, thought leader, and he also trains Interpol on how do you detect financial crime, how do you detect money laundering. A very well received course titled Think Like a Money Launderer. And so we have a different, we have an own proprietary method that we have developed. And we also have software that we have also developed. It's our own proprietary software. And this is all focused with the idea to detect financial crime. But there's also a lot of data analytics behind that can be used for many other purposes as well. So we have our key, let me move this out somewhere. So our key strategy is sort of follow the money and follow the goods. And we have, there's some other things that I need to get rid of. Apologies, sorting my screen. So our strategy is follow the money. And with that following the money, there's lots of obfuscation that we can find, lots of setups and structures to disguise, lots of hidden patterns and hidden relationships that you wouldn't see as a initially investigating somebody. You would usually just go, who are we investigating? And then it is very difficult to find out what is the flow of money. And for those of you who ask immediately, do you have access to bank transaction data? The first answer is no, we don't. Banking financial transactions are a total secret and well guarded. On the other hand, we do. And it depends on a case-by-case basis. And we also have follow the goods. So we are looking at not only how the goods are supplied, often goods are misdeclared, obfuscated, put into other categories. And if you don't have the right subscription, then you would never know what else do they smuggle or what else do they do. And so we are taking a global view and a holistic view, and are looking at also how do they obfuscate the goods, how do they smuggle, and who else is involved. And we're also working with universities to find trade patterns that are either not yet known or where the extent of the trade is not yet known. And as I said, we have award-winning proprietary software that helps us with doing all the investigation. So the combating illicit markets, what are the challenges usually? The challenges are gigantic. I just read a few days ago that the counterfeit market is like $400 and something billion that has been amassed by criminals just in the last 10 years. And to put this into perspective, this amount is the combined economic trillion, and it was actually 400 trillion something, is the combined economic output of France, Germany, and the UK combined. And that's how large they got. And so criminals are everywhere, and they're well integrated into society, well integrated into corporate structures and governments. And so it's, the time is now before the rest of the world also falls into the hands of criminals. And so there's something one needs to do very soon. And in particular, sort of looking at penalties for counterfeiting, for example. So counterfeit is a huge profit margin, better than drugs. And but the penalties is still very low. It's counterfeit. Okay, so here's a few thousand in penalties and very little jail term. And but if you do it as an organized crime, then you just send somebody to jail, you recruit them for that, and it's done. And to get organized crime rings that counterfeit your products on counterfeiting charges is very limited. So we are looking at what other charges can we put to them, and how else could we get them. And what we find is often, it surprised us at first, but now it's a regular. So whenever they do counterfeiting, they usually also do drugs trafficking, arms trafficking, human slavery, and they finance terrorism with it. And so it's transnational. It's organized crime that is behind the counterfeiting, and that's why one should also carefully look who is behind all these illicit websites and all these individuals and companies that now made a bundle through the COVID crisis in online sales, for example. And so we find that traditional investigations, they usually are focused on seizures. So there's a container containing illicit goods. Let's seize that and see who shipped it and where's it coming from. And then it stops there, but it doesn't. And this is where we start. So then we look at who is behind, and we build out the whole network. So the traditional investigations is often also on the ground, because you need to take pictures, you need to visit places, you need to see for yourself what they do, and often get first-hand information. You can only get it from on the ground. At the same time, what we also need to do is establish the bigger picture, like who pays whom, how do they pay, where do the proceeds end up, what else do they finance with it, what assets do they buy with them, and are the proceeds being used for serious crimes such as terrorism financing, for example, which is important because from the law enforcement perspective, if you come and go to law enforcement, somebody counterfeited my handbag or so, then then they go, yeah, it's really bad. If you say somebody is faking COVID vaccines and they are financing Al-Shabaab with it, then law enforcement goes, okay, this is serious, and then it's your case has better chances to get prioritized. Then also there's an understanding from the law enforcement angle. So the law enforcement, of course, it's taxpayers' money, so they are restricted to looking inside the country, which the criminals are using. So it's transnational, so they commit the crime in one country, but it's not yet a crime because it hasn't been sold. So then they ship it, and then they sell it in international waters. So there's actually no crime committed. And then whilst the buyer buys it on international waters, which is also their own company in another country, then they haven't committed a crime because it hasn't been it hasn't been counterfeit. They just bought it, and so the game continues, and they're really using the transnational view in order to be invisible, to be non-enforceable, and to do other things. So it's important that fighting counterfeit organized crime networks, it's important to get to who's behind and how do they operate, and then to find different angles that one could also get to them, like criminal cases, civil cases, negotiation, and many other ways, asset recovery. So what we think, what needs to be done? I think illicit market needs to be stopped where and when the opportunity presents itself. So this could be done at very unexpected places. For example, we find, there's a tea company, their container got compromised, and then we find there's ivory inside, and so then so they violated the tea company, and then we know who it was, so we found the person who's renting the property. So and then apparently it was this guy. What hasn't been investigated then is who else was part of the container witnessing and everyone who is involved. And when we look closer into this one, then we found, for example, that one of the witnesses of the container packing is actually a convicted Nairobi shopping mall bomber. And so now we know, okay, Al-Shabaab is into this. These elephants have been killed because it's Al-Shabaab, and then they take an innocent tea company, infiltrate their system because they know they have the right agreements in place, trades, that the containers won't be open, and so on, and then they can smuggle the rest through. So it needs a big data research approach, and it needs to establish the full picture behind the organized crime in illicit markets. And we feel that follow the money approach is where it can be stopped, because that's the most painful thing, and that's why the criminals are doing it. It's always for profit. And so how can we get to their money, and how can we confiscate and seize and so on their money? And the bankers amongst the audience will know there's a whole framework of how do you do money laundering charges, and what is the remit that one can do getting somebody on money laundering. So then follow the goods approach, that one needs to identify the patterns. So if you have one seizure, it's a pattern. It's very likely a pattern. And if it's a pattern, it's also likely to be predictable. So you could confiscate more if you would only know the pattern and the full extent, how they are disguising it. And so this is also what we specialize in. And the global data needs to establish global patterns of organized crime and their money laundering activities. And global law enforcement action needs to be activated, and asset recovery is an option, a real option. So our method is a multi-trail approach, two-pronged. So we put together the follow the goods that will give us the ideas of the pattern, the people involved, the ships used, the consignee used, the ports in question, and what else they likely smuggle. And we also do follow the money, where we can identify the funds movement along all the entities that are involved into this. And we find that this trail is a very powerful trail, because it gives us lots and lots of angles on how could we approach this organized crime network in order to either make them leave their territory, go somewhere else, lose their assets, and some of it can be billions, and hurt them where it hurts most. So we find this is a very effective way, and we also have some successes already. So in further detail, what does the investigation actually do? So we have an AI-assisted tool that builds networks and builds relationships between pieces of information. And so with that, we look into who is behind it, who is trading with whom, where are they traded, and establish the full background of the patterns. And then we look at the patterns themselves, the sales and the distribution network. So what is the next plan? For example, we find a trademark in a country that they are not yet. But so why would you register a trademark into this country? Because you probably have plans to go there. And then that will allow us to identify and preempt of what are their plans, and many other pieces of information. And then, of course, the ultimate goal is to identify who's behind the illicit market. So who's like the ultimate beneficiary of this. And so with that, we build the criminal network of companies and people. And this can go really far. Like what companies do they own? Who else is sitting on their board? What other shareholders do they have? And what other companies do the shareholders have? And who else sits on their board? And so you can play this game until, in some cases, we had 50 layers down to get to the ultimate beneficiary owner. And I hear between between Putin and the front company, it's 100 companies in between. And so it's huge, and it needs technology in order to establish all of these, which we have built. So we need to understand enablers, distributors, obfuscators, and the ultimate beneficiary owner. And then it's about how do we get, how can we stop them? How can we curb the activity, or how can we hurt them? And so, for example, identifying you have 32 properties in Florida, and I think we need to talk is sometimes more powerful than to say, oh, we engage into a lengthy criminal investigation, which the organized crime ring will will do their best to bribe and so on, and then to drag out the case. So this is our a glimpse of our software. We recently won an award for best cloud-based financial threat and investigation platform. And so we're in the cloud. It's available as a subscription, and it has numerous features and functionalities like building the network, checking them already against other pieces of information like sanctions lists, or are they involved in governments, and so on. And it has a data analytics module. The one in the iPhone shape form is the screen print, is where you can analyze many pieces of information with each other. For example, there's this this counterfeit network, and now we want to know who of their shareholders is also registered on the property list. And then mostly, instead of typing in one by one, you can upload like your network. You can upload the property list, upload the sanctions or the PEPs and adverse media data pieces, and then you combine it all together, and then you would get very quickly to extremely detailed information at high speed. So it cuts down like months of investigation work. And we also have a typology library that holds artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms for the detection of counterfeiting. So this is a combined global knowledge. How can you detect counterfeits? How can you detect the money made from counterfeits? And what pieces of data do you need? What do you need to compare with what? And then in order to find your information. So we have all of this in our software. And so then we get often we get engaged for identifying specific cases. Like here's a seizure of a container containing counterfeits. Could you help us find out who it was? And or we have these people we identified, they're selling things on the internet, on e-commerce platforms. We shut down many of them. What we so far know about them is this, 10 names and Telegram channels and other things. Can you help us either find hardcore evidence, or can you help us find out who are all these people involved into the online sales of fake goods? And so what we would typically do is going through a background check, and this is everything you can find out from whatever the case has. We would then look into the pieces of information that we are being given. Of course, if you give us, the more you give us, the more we can find. And we're doing background checks of everything, sort of their geographic location, their names, spouses, children, location, online activity, and many other things. Then our goal is to build the network. So we take all these pieces of information and build out the network. With our software, it's fairly fast. And we have other tools as well that build custom networks, where we can put in trade data together with address data, together with seizure data, together with property data, together with the company and the network and the people. and then form the network. So graphically, you can actually see who you're dealing with and how widespread they are. Then we find that there's no limit to data. Everybody is collecting data, but not necessarily in ways that that it would be immediately obvious. So, for example, you probably all have a fitness app where you're being given, the coaching on how can you improve your fitness, how can you lose weight, and so there's many apps. We all put in our names, we put in the location, and yeah, we want to see where we're running. So there's location data. And then there's also names, and then we want to share it to somebody. So then there's spouses data, and then friends data, and so there's heaps and heaps of information on what else can we put into the equation. And then on a case-by-case basis, that's what we do. Then there's trade data analysis that we do. So every industry, if it's tobacco, if it's machinery, if it's pharmaceuticals, they usually have different what we call typologies. And typologies is something like a method. And methods are described by the likes of Interpol or Europol, by financial regulators and other industry bodies, by NGOs. So everyone who has previously identified how a particular trick works is writing a typology. And that gives us indication of where do we need to look. Knowing what to look for is starting often with researching what is the typology in this particular industry. So for smuggling tobacco, for example, we know that criminals disguise it as toys, as furniture, and some other things. For smuggling drugs, we know that heavy equipment is needed in order to not let the goods be seen by X-rays, and so you would want to use somebody who is shipping rocks, for example, and then you stuff the counterfeits in between. And then the X-rays wouldn't penetrate through the rocks, so customs can't see what's in it. And if they do want to see it, then it's incredibly expensive to open a container, have the heavy machinery to remove these goods, these rocks first, and then see what's inside. And so chances that customs open it is very small. And the same goes for machinery parts. So if you have airplane turbines or motor parts or so, there's lots of hollow spaces where you can put counterfeits in there. And then also because it's made out of metal, the X-rays can't penetrate. So the customs is relying on people like us or on tip-offs from clients in order to see which container to open. And so we look at what is the typology, and then we build the trade patterns behind it. So we could establish them, how do they, how much trading do they do? What do they obfuscate it in? We know who is their network, what are the entities, and then we look at what are the, how do they disguise it, and how can we find it in the trade data? And then can we predict the next delivery? So it's an automated but piecemeal approach. And so on a case-by-case basis, we use our software, our human intelligence, previous intelligence, and lots of big data in order to find the right information. And it usually closes with a recommendation based on our findings. What legal cause of action would we recommend? So either, does it go into civil litigation? Does it go into a criminal case? Does it go into asset recovery? Does it go into, is it a terrorism financing case or drugs case where the pots are much bigger of law enforcement to act? And so we would end with a recommendation of what should be done. And so from the legal perspective, we are proposing probable cause. So it's probable cause is important so that law enforcement has enough reason to go in there and ask for bank records or do raids on premises. And so based on our experience and our knowledge and skills, we recommend a cause of action. The client chooses which one they want to do, and it doesn't. We either help or we don't help. So it's an add-on service that we also offer. And there's also a thing of, do you need to testify in court when you tip off? Then maybe you get put into court, and so we have a way to also avoid that, and clients can go through us, so that nobody has to testify in court, because it's dangerous. So, and then for follow the goods, we have fast actions against like online websites and so on. There's a way to find where else do they advertise their goods. Then we have success stories. So we're in operation for over 3 years now. We have our own proprietary software, and we've done work for the pharma industry, for tobacco, for machinery, and fast-moving consumer goods. And in these cases, we identified parties involved in the production, the distribution, and the marketing aspect, and how they get it across the borders. And we finished with establishing probable cause for law enforcement. We also work on the supply chain side, where supply chains get infiltrated either with counterfeits or with just too cheap material to be true. And so we look at ESG violations, environment, social, and G is what government, I think. And so we look for ESG violations, and that is human trafficking inside, child labor, and environmental damages. And we look at supply chain validation. So is my supply chain, do they have a supplier who might violate ESG rules? There's now many laws coming out, strong laws. Just in Germany now, it got ratified, Lieferkettengesetz, that it's that German companies now need to make sure that their suppliers don't violate ESG rules. So this is also where we can play. And then we often work for law firms, and they want to have like some asset recovery. We operate globally, so wherever the case, we use big data, and we use it out of Singapore. And so there's no need for us to go on the ground. We have partners who can, if that is wanted, but we operate from Singapore. How you can engage us is we offer like subscriptions. So either subscriptions to us as investigators. They can be annual, they can be any budget. And we also do long-term deep dive investigations, where it's about one case, but organized crime that often takes months or years to investigate. And we also have a software subscription. Our software is available cloud-based, so it doesn't really matter where. So if you have, and now this console is covering part of this, I will put it up here. If you wanted to take a screen print, you may. These are our contact details. And if you have further questions, I'll be very happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elka, for this insightful presentation. I think it was something different than what's usually presented, looking into a different perspective when it comes to the money behind the counterfeit goods. How does it come and how does it go, and how what sort of people are being funded through these counterfeits, through buying a simple fake bag that for a consumer think it's not really that harmful or not that bad, but deep behind it there is a huge criminal organization that's being funded. I think the presentation was pretty technical. I'm not sure if we haven't received any questions.
No.
But it was pretty clear. So thank you for the presentation. I see George have already shared his screen as well. So thank you very much, Elka, for the presentation.
Okay, thank you, and yeah, have fun and save some time now, as there are no questions. So give it some time back. Yeah.
Great. So moving to our next session, it will be presented by George Abraham, who is the Managing Director for e-commerce foundation scamadvisor.com. George has been part of the international e-commerce community since 1997. He has been manager of e-commerce at Pigenkov, an upmarket department store chain, TUI, Europe's largest travel organization, online publisher at Sanoma Media, the largest media company in Benelux, and director of consulting as Unique, a Europe-wide e-commerce strategy and implementation firm. I hope I pronounced all these names correctly.
Good enough, Hazim. Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you,
also
George.
cannot pronounce your name correctly, so no problem.
All right, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazim. Thank you very much all for being here. As Hazim was saying, my name is George Abraham. I run the e-commerce foundation, and part of the e-commerce foundation is also an initiative called scamadvisor.com. Maybe briefly about the e-commerce foundation. Our mission is to foster global digital trade, and we do that in several ways. We publish together with our partner RetailX about 20 reports annually on how to sell online in Germany, China, Russia, Brazil, etc. We host a community called ecommercewiki.org, where about 40,000 e-commerce professionals share their knowledge and insights. We have an initiative called Safe.shop, a global trust seal specially meant for smaller web shops in developing countries to sell across the world. And finally, and very honestly, now probably 80% of all our work is scamadvisor.com. Briefly about scamadvisor.com, it was set up by Mark Roberts, a developer from the UK in 2012. He bought a golf set online, and it proved to be a fake. And as you know, nothing is as dangerous as an angry developer. So he started to develop an algorithm to determine what's the likelihood of this website being either legit or a scam. We took over from Mark in 2018, and we have been modernizing the platform, both the front end as well as the back end, to make to improve the algorithm and to better identify scammy websites from legit websites. So if you go to scamadvisor.com, it's actually very simple. I mean, you type in a domain name, and we give you a rating to see what's the likelihood of this website being either legit or a scam. And we also highlight the positive findings as well as the negative findings. And partly thanks to Corona, we now have more than 100,000 consumers every day checking scamadvisor.com. And we add about 1 million domain names to our database on a monthly basis. We do not crawl the web. Every domain name is entered by a consumer, and we check that website. And that also allows us to find a lot of websites which cannot be found by Google or Bing, because scammers do not want to be found. But we find them, and we analyze them, and we tell the consumer if it's reliable or not. So as I said before, the Scam Advisor gives a score. 1 meaning very, 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 very likely a scam. For legal reasons, we cannot say it is a scam. And 100 meaning very likely legit. And we do that based on about 40 different databases. So we search for company-related data. We check for website data, how popular the website is, if it's using, what kind of technology it's using, technical data, and we're slowly also implementing artificial intelligence, because we are lucky in one way. Scammers are lazy, and they repeat their work over and over, and that allows us to fingerprint websites and recognize them faster the next time. So enough about Scam Advisor. I've also been asked to tell a little bit about what are scams and how big are they actually. There's a fine border between giving bad service and being a scam. And of course, Apple and ASOS, their ratings are terrible on websites like Trustpilot and SiteJabber, but they're not scams. The service may sometimes be bad, but Allah. What we define as a scam is where a consumer or a company volunteers in giving money or data or other assets expecting a service or a good in return, but he never gets it, or he gets something which is in no way comparable to what he could expect. So scams are very much related to online fraud and cybercrime. And one of the big parts of course, about scams is counterfeits. I mean, consumers are in many cases buying counterfeits aware, but in much more cases, and we also researched it, they actually buy a product where they think it's legit, but it's a counterfeit. And we see that cyber criminals are often offering multiple kinds of scams, including counterfeit, selling dating scams and other cybercrimes. So they're usually quite large networks, and selling counterfeit is one of the services they provide. So what we see happening in the market is that scammers often do send a product. You expect a nice Christmas decoration, and this is what you get. Or you expect a stove, a firewood stove, and this is what you get. Of course, these are scams. They're the only reason why the scammer is sending something so that he can say to the credit card company or PayPal, hey, I delivered the product or service. And the scammer is only trying to delay the chargeback until the consumer gives up trying to get his money back. Some scams are obvious, and believe it or not, we did get questions about this website. Hey, is this legit? Can I earn money with this or not? And I had to disappoint mainly men about this website. However, everybody can fall for a scam. We have done research among 5,000 consumers, and to my surprise, PhDs are actually getting scammed more often than people with a low education. And the scammer just targets its scam at a specific target group. So all elderly people, sometimes people who do not speak English very well, but also at people who are very highly educated. They just take the time. So especially people who are getting scammed in romantic dating or forex scams, they're being fattened up for 3 to 6 months before the scammer thinks he has built up enough trust and starts to ask for money or says, hey, this is a great investment, why don't you join me? What we also see as a trend is that scammers are becoming more and more professional. So they are able to build up entire networks of websites, not having one website, but up to 400 or 500 websites, each copying the same scam. And we get a lot of reports in, but it's very fragmented. And that's the reason why the scammer is doing it, is to remain undetected for police forces worldwide. They're also becoming more sophisticated. The IFMRRC website, for example, gives the impression to certify other websites that they're legit financial companies. But we have a very, very, very likely feeling that they're actually part of this scam, because the only websites they certify are websites which, in our opinion, are very, very, very likely to be scams. But for a normal consumer, it's of course very difficult to see that, hey, this looks like a certification body, it will be okay. It's very difficult to determine it might not be the case. So, and scammers are also investing more and more into marketing. We see it on Facebook, but for example, a website called Marvelet was up for 82 days. And in those 82 days, they spent 3 million on Google AdWords, advertising a product which in the end they never delivered. And of course, scammers have a marketing budget of nearly 100%, because if they do not deliver the product, anybody ordering on their website, it's 100% profit. What we also see happening are so-called chargeback help desks. People see on their credit card document that money has been removed, for example, by vivax.com, weird domain names. They go to this website and they're guided to actually cancel subscription. The subscription can be for a legit website, but usually offering adult services or gambling, so that the partner doesn't know that you're actually gambling with your credit card. But in many cases, there are scammers who just try to delay the chargeback process and prevent that they're getting banned by their payment service provider. Once you've been scammed, then the scammer usually doesn't let loose. So the next email you can expect once you have bought a product is from a delivery company saying, hey, I've got your product here. I can ship it to you, but you have to pay custom duty or environmental tax. And after you have paid custom duty and environmental tax, there's also an insurance fee you have to pay and an administration fee. The product itself, of course, never arrives, and they just continue charging money until the consumer thinks, hey, this is no longer okay. And then, unfortunately, victims are also shared. On the dark web, you can find so-called donkey lists. And once you're on it, it means that you're probably invested in a cryptocurrency scam, and you're getting contacted by people who can help you recover your money. The only thing you have to do is pay $500 to get your money. And of course, you never get it. So it's a remarkable industry. And what we wanted to know last year is how big is the online scam industry? And what we did is, and I have to make a disclaimer here, is we investigated 31 countries to see how they are handling scams. However, the way each country handles scams is very differently. They have different definitions, different methods to measure it. So while we did our best and we analyzed 31 countries, the data is still very unreliable, but we hope to improve this year over year. What we did learn is that scams are becoming a major part of overall crime worldwide. It depends very much on the country, but most countries reported a significant growth over the last year. Of course, also part due to Corona, but also in 2019, the growth figures were already very high. And we see that they're reporting growths of 30%, 50%. In Singapore, 27% of all crime is now related to scams. And we see the same kinds of figures in the USA, in the UK, etc. What we also learned is that every country has its own preferred scam. So in China, gaming scams are very popular, where you try to buy a magic sword or a new Fortnite skin, but you never get it. In India, Ponzi schemes are very popular. In Russia, it's more crypto. So every country has its own preference. But in the end, we get scammed. All of us get scammed, and the scammers work globally and operate globally. So as I said, we collected a lot of data on the number of scams, the amount lost, etc. And based on that, we are coming with our first guesstimate. And as we analyze 31 countries, covering about 85% of GDP, we estimate that in scams online, 36 billion is being lost. However, what you have to take into consideration is that only 7% of the consumers actually report being scammed. So my estimate is that this number of 36 billion is probably much lower than the real figure. So how are countries handling scams? Here we see that some countries are centralizing scam reporting. We see Scam Watch in Australia, Scam Alert in Singapore, Action Fraud in the UK. However, while these initiatives are trying to centralize scam reporting, in my own country, the Netherlands, we see that Fraude Helpdesk only gets a fraction of all those scam reports, because consumers can also report it to the consumer union, to victim support, to the police, to payment methods, to credit card companies. So as a result, the number of scams being reported is already very low, 7%, and it's extremely fragmented across many, many organizations, which often do not dare to share this data due to the GDPR legislation. So as a conclusion, we can draw that scammers are actually winning. And the reason is it's very cheap to set up a scam. I mean, you can advertise for free on Facebook, you can get an SSL certificate for free. On Shopify, you can set up a web shop for free. And for 99 euros, you can buy a Ponzi scheme software or a investment banker website, which looks extremely professional, and you can start your scam within a day. What we also see is that scams are out of control. Law enforcement cannot handle it. 33% of all the crime reported in the UK are now related to fraud. And of those 33% cases, only 2% of all these cases are actually prosecuted. Not meaning that the cyber criminal gets behind bars, it's just being prosecuted because they are often not there when they're being prosecuted. So how can we turn the tide? What we at Scam Advisor are trying to do is convince all the countries, all brand protection agencies, all law enforcement to actually share their data. Because we think that that's the only way to beat these scammers. Because these scammers operate globally, often in 60 or 80 countries, and they make sure that they're never scamming in their own country. So by sharing all this data, we can identify scammers much more quickly than is now the case, and also start law enforcement procedures more quickly. And that's now what we're trying to do. We work together with about 50 different organizations, brand protection agencies, law enforcement, consumer protection agencies, security companies, to make the scam market more transparent by offering parties a way to report bad websites to us, but also we make available to all our partners all our data to let them fight scammers more effectively. So what does it mean for you as a brand? As you know, taking down a website has become increasingly difficult. It has always been a slow and inefficient process. There's no uniform process in the sense that taking a website down from .com is very different than from .shop. We see in many countries like Russia, like China, that it's not always being met with a very supportive registry or hosting company. The GDPR legislation has been one of, in my personal opinion, one of the EU's worst inventions, in the sense that it has made it very easy for scammers to remain hidden. And services like Cloudflare make it very difficult to identify the organizations behind a website. And finally, we now also have bulletproof hosting, where the hosting company actually says, we will keep your website online no matter what. So trying to protect your brand online is something like whacking them all. I mean, you whack one website and 10 others pop up. And taking down websites is still something we will have to do, but we're experimenting with an alternative method, and that's blocking websites or warning consumers about them. What we're trying to achieve is that instead of only trying to take the website down, which is quite a long and laborious process, is that you can report bad websites to Scam Advisor. It's free, and we will warn the DNS filters and antivirus software companies, because they have the capability to actually block a website to the consumer or warn the consumer when he's approaching a website. So for example, Trend Micro is one of our partners. We feed our scam data to them, and they show a pop-up on the websites they're protecting with their antivirus software that this website might be a scam. Are you sure you want to continue? So that's it from my side. We hope you will join our initiative to fight scammers, and maybe also willing to join our experiment to actually block websites. Hazim, may I give the floor back to you?
Thank you, George, for the presentation. It's an interesting side of it. Scammers, I think we all almost got scammed once, maybe twice. Some of us actually got scammed. So we have two questions, starting with Roman Boyko. Let me answer that live, if you can see it. Do you face falsification of Scam Advisor itself?
Sorry, Hazim, could you repeat the question?
Do you face falsification?
Yes. We come across several scammers who are copying our website or misusing our name. There's also a money recovery service which is using Scam-Advisor. Yeah, and we try to take these websites down, but unfortunately, Mark in 2012 chose a name which is difficult to protect as a brand. But we do try to fight these. So yes, Roman, we have our own challenges with brand protection as well.
Thank you, Roman, for the question. Roman representing Sanofi. He's the security manager for Sanofi. We have another question, which is, please also share views on iOS or Android app-based scams.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we do not cover apps yet. It's definitely on our to-do list. We now focus only on domain names, so websites, but we want to expand towards email addresses, Bitcoin wallets, apps, Facebook groups, because in my modest opinion, Facebook is one of the most misused platforms by scammers in the world. So it's on our to-do list, but it's probably going to be 2022, unfortunately.
All right, fantastic, George. I think we've covered all the questions that we've received. If you could take a minute if there's any further questions. If not, I think we can move on to our next session. I think, George, I will take over the virtual stage from you, if you don't mind.
No, and thank you very much for having me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, George.
Bye-bye.
So our next session for the day will be presented by Basil Al-Turk, who is currently the country manager for the UAE and KSA for Rouse. Basil joined Rouse in 2006 and now heads Rouse UAE and KSA practices, as well as heading the Middle East and North Africa dispute resolution team. Basil was made principal in 2016, and he works on a range of IP matters in our Middle East practice from the office in Dubai, with particular focus on enforcement and complex IP litigation in the Middle East and North Africa. So I think, Basil, you could join us on the virtual stage here. Let me confirm. Yep.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Possibly good morning and good night for some of you, depending where you are, which time zone. Thank you very much, Georgie. You've made my presentation look very simple, given that I mainly want to talk about innovation, like how it crosses roads with intellectual property and with the anti-scamming system. You've covered most of that because you've showed how scammers are using innovation to infringe rights and violate rights. And at the same time, you've shown how you're using technology and innovation to try to combat that. So that's a big part of what I wanted to say. I'll try not to talk about it again. I'll try to cover as much as I can. Now I just wanna share the slideshow. So you can see my slides as a slideshow, yeah? Yep. Okay, so I'm trying to cover as much as I can the topic from a more Middle East approach, and that's basically because of lots of the changes that are happening here in the region in terms of moving more into innovation-based economies. You might be seeing me a little bit looking off the screen because I have you projected on a bigger screen because I had something done to my eyes today, and I have to look at a bigger screen so that I can see the slides better. But the camera is on my actual screen. So let me fix that again. Okay. So as you may know, in the Middle East and especially in the GCC, a lot of countries are looking into moving more into unconventional basis of the economies. So they want to move more into knowledge and innovation-based economies. And as you all will know, that traditionally the economies in the Middle East have been based on very conventional economies, starting from the basics of farming and small and medium industries to the big oil companies that we have. Now we know that with the crisis that happened in 2009 and now crisis after COVID, that oil-based economies solely depending on oil production are not sustainable for the future. And there have been a lot of initiatives issued by the government to move more into more sustainable economies for the future, and that would definitely need introduction of innovation and knowledge. which means they need to make the region attractable for such investments. So I'm going to talk about economies in general, what innovation-based economies, and what does that mean in terms of intellectual property. I'm going to talk about the impact of that on the private businesses and at the commercial level, so the actual brand owners and the IP owners, and what would that impact also the IP services, so us as firms that we provide the IP services to our clients, whether them being government or brand owners or IP owners. But I'm gonna always relate to the IP owners. So whenever we talk about something, I try always to come back and see how it impacts the IP owners, because it's very important to understand the impacts of these changes on the generation of IP, so how you're generating intellectual property. So in terms of knowledge-based economies. So what are mainly the knowledge, what is mainly a knowledge-based economy? We hear about that a lot. We know that Saudi Arabia has started to shift its economy. We know that UAE started to shift its economy into a knowledge and innovation-based economy. But honestly, when I first heard that, I was like, wow, what does that mean to me as an IP owner, as an IP service provider? And we started researching, and we found that there's a lot that we could do, we should do, and possibly there's a lot of things that we're afraid to do. So if there are economists around in the crowd, I know that that's going to bore you. I'm just looking at this from an intellectual property perspective. So I know that I've missed some things, maybe not intentionally, just because of my ignorance in economics in general. But in knowledge-based economy, they're mainly the three pillars that we're going to talk about in more details. But the most important thing about the knowledge-based economy is that we need to imagine that we're replacing the key production from what we know as conventional to actual knowledge. So we're actually producing knowledge. So it's an economy that's capable of producing knowledge, in which knowledge becomes a major factor of growth within that economy, and a major factor of the wealth creation of the economy, and a major factor of the employment within the country and within the jurisdiction. So everything around the economy becomes revolving around knowledge and innovation production. So as a result of that, you would actually notice and realize that the human capital becomes engine for creativity. So you're creating new things, you're innovating all the time, and you're creating new ideas. This is very important to understand, because these economies therefore becomes a major engine for product of intellectual property. So it is crucial to have these economies as well. So the governments running these economies as well understand that they can't do that without having protection of intellectual property, because it's the protection of the major elements of the wealth creation. So going back to these pillars and trying to talk about them in more details, you will realize that we're talking about three main things: the variables, the knowledge, and the globalization. Now, I'm not gonna go through these in order. Let's talk first about globalization. Globalization is one of the major elements of knowledge-based economies, and that's not because innovation is always in technology and telecommunication that makes the world smaller. It actually because it harmonizes production in a way. So I was having a discussion with Hazim yesterday, and we were talking about, in few years' time, instead of you going to a furniture store and buying a chair that needed to go through a full supply chain of manufacturing and shipping and warehousing, you'll be able to print your living room in your living room. So you've purchased that technology, that idea, that innovation that traveled from one place to another with a click of a button. And that's what we're talking about, homogeneous and harmony of production and harmony of and that would impact harmony in culture and harmony in lifestyle and harmony in a lot of other things. And this is what actually leads to globalization. And the globalization is a sword of two blades, because in economic wars in the future, wherever economies are based on knowledge, then you will look at deglobalization. And this is what we've seen in the American Chinese economic war during the Trump administration. We've realized, we felt like there was some kind of deglobalization, because we felt like there was some break in travel of technology. American products are less being manufactured in China, or there are some kind of obstacles and limitations of these manufacturing. Chinese technologies cannot go further than the Chinese borders, and all of this was a deglobalization. And we can see that this is a very important factor within these economies that we need to take into consideration. Now, knowledge, as we defined it before, it's going to be the capital. So it is the actual capital of these economies and the wealth creation. Variables is where the actual meat is. So when we're talking about the variable, we're talking about that these economies are much less predictable than other economies, because there's a lot of variable taking place. And we've felt that in the dot-com crisis in the 90s. Everyone believed that this is going to be the future. At 99, 2000, there was articles that actually said that people in few years' time will stop using internet, and that internet was just a phase. So it was going the other way around. So, and these are the kinds of variables that would impact these economies. So there's some kind of instability, and this instability is a major factor. It is what makes these economies capable of growth and capable of increasing of wealth. The issue with variables, and where we play a big part in, is that we as IP service providers and as experts in the IP framework and foundation, we will be able to at least have the law and the practice deal with a lot of elements around the certainty of the innovation and the protection of the innovation. Because if there wasn't certainty around protection of innovations, and the economies are actually based on variables and uncertainty, no one is going to invest in that. And this is where we need to get these governments who are putting forward these initiatives to make sure that they build proper foundations of intellectual property. So I'll give an example of the United Arab Emirates. Now in the UAE, we're looking into around 2030, so in 9 to 8 years from now, where most of the economy will be based on innovation and knowledge. People would think that, okay, we still have time. Now, the problem with that is laws are not enough. You need laws and practice. So if they now copy the best laws in the world in relation to the protection of innovation and knowledge and patents, the issue is that an investor into these areas would not only look into what the law would say, would come and ask, how would a judge or a court of law or an arbitrator in this jurisdiction deal with this specific question of law? And without proper practice that has been for a certain period of time, we can't build that certainty. And this is where we're working as much as we can within lobbying groups with the government, trying to, as much as we can, even if we need to import certainty by getting judges from elsewhere to come and work within these jurisdictions for a certain period of time, or set up some specialized courts and get experts to advise these courts in order to clear that uncertainty in practice. we're going to try to do that. So we're working around these areas with the government. So in terms of what we've said, they all fall within the external. If we want to apply to an IP team within an organization, an IP owner, we will realize that these are external forces that's gonna in the future reshape how the IP team deals with things. So we have the deglobalization, which I've already talked about when we talked about globalization. So that would people would need to have more expertise and understanding on how would that impact the IP of a certain company, and the IP team needs to be prepared for that. Now, in terms of digitalization, and Georgie has also talked about that, especially when he talked about data. Digitalization is a very important factor of the future of intellectual property, because most governments right now, Saudi Arabia in particular, they are looking more into digitalizing the government services, and at the same time attracting investments into digitalization. And there was a big paper by highly ranked Saudi officials saying this is the future of Saudi Arabia. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about the proper understanding of what that would result in terms of data and data regulations and data management and data processing. And when governments of that size start understanding a lot about data, we have, here's the pros and cons. So the pros is data it's going to become a hugely regulated area. IP teams need to understand and to build expertise around that area and the cross between data and intellectual property. And at the same time, as Georgie really said, there are the cons where when data is very highly regulated, investigations are going to be much less feasible and much less practical. We can't take down websites easily because we can't know who's behind these websites. And even if we do take down these websites, we can't investigate further. So the offline activity would remain the same. So we can't link online with offline easily anymore. So that's something that IP teams need to look at more and more particular. There is AI and machine learning. The UAE has a minister for artificial intelligence. So we have an AI minister. That shows how the governments here are also reshaping their services, reshaping their attraction, their foreign investment initiatives into areas that are extremely important. So companies and IP owners need to be more practically expert in these areas as well to be able to help governments forward with that. In terms of environmentalism and climate change, we've seen a lot of crossroads between climate change and intellectual property. When we first were talking about that 5-6 years ago, people would say they don't believe there's any relation between climate change and intellectual property. And Rauza back then had a partner who was department head of climate change and IP. So he's head of something that people in the market believe did not exist. Now we find that there's a lot of people have more relating into climate change and IP. I mean, and there's a lot of crossroads. I mean, there's a crossroad of, do we really understand what's the carbon footprint of our IP? So companies do not really take, in many instances, the carbon footprint of their intellectual property, and that's something that they would need to take more into consideration. And we've created a calculator that would actually do that. One other thing that that is an important crossroad is innovation, obviously, into combating climate change, and a lot of companies are doing that. But a very, very important factor is the brand communication. So today, a lot of people believe, I mean, statistically speaking, there are more people who believe what the communication through a brand than the communication through a news agent. So they're more loyal to a brand. If the brand is communicating a good cause, they're more respondent to that good cause than them actually looking at the news on any channel and hearing that news. So brands have become a communication, a tool, a medium of communication. And that's very important, because whenever brands communicate good causes such as climate change, that's one example only, it means for us as IP practitioners that it adds value to the IP and intangible assets of the company itself, and we will be able to take that into consideration in their story as a company, as an intangible asset, and in their brand as an IP valuation as well. The last bit in crossroads between climate change and an IP, I'm not going to go into more detail, but just to throw it out there for people who are interested, is geographical indications. So when you have a geographical indication protected because of a set of criteria that makes a certain product within certain characteristics because of climate and location, what if the climate changes and shifts somewhere else? This is a big question. And there aren't enough studies. I mean, there are a lot of opinions. There aren't enough studies to say, well, that means that the GI needs to shift, or that means that consumers are still linked to the name of the GI and not the characteristics, because they're bound to change with time. Now, in terms of what these changes mean to commercial businesses. Commercial businesses, they need to become much more innovative, and they need to become much more present in the way they communicate with their consumers. And they need to be, the IP teams need to be much more aware of the intangible assets rather than just becoming executors of registering trademarks, protecting trademarks, doing anti-counterfeiting. They need to understand what's the return of investment on that. Understanding that more than 75% of new businesses from the teens of the 2000, so 2013 and above, 75% of these businesses are intangible assets, and that's very important factor in terms of intellectual property. We need to understand we're not only as IP professionals within the business, within an IP holder, we're not a cost base. We're protecting an asset that constitutes 75% sometimes of the value of the whole business. We should be able to translate that, communicate that internally, and at the same time, we should be able to understand what that means in terms of return on investment as well, in our cost. How is that impacting the growth of the company itself, or the growth of the assets and the valuation of these assets? And by doing that, they will understand better the budgets, they will understand better the value of IP, and be able to create better budgets better budgets in relation to running the departments, the relevant departments. Now, most importantly, when we're talking about this, if IP teams don't step up and do that, that actually means that, and which is happening today, that actually means any big innovation projects, investment projects in innovation and elsewhere, and consulting projects in relation to big strategic plans and IP are being discussed with the CEO or the board or the COO or the CFO of a company, but rather than actually it being discussed with the professional intellectual property team, because they're thinking at a strategic level, they're not including the IP teams. The IP teams need to step up to start thinking at a strategic level, and possibly most companies, and they started creating chief IPO, so CIPOs, that we are able to do things like that, and big companies are starting to think into that direction. In terms of the impact of that on, so this to put all of these as internal forces on and impacts on the internal teams, we'll see that as we said, digitalization. As there are budget pressures that puts things make things very difficult. There's a need of speed because of the return of investment and because of the introduction of technologies into businesses, and there is the data issue. So as Georgie was saying, and as we said in the governments are now looking more into regulating data. So the IP teams need to be prepared. Are they prepared to be able to take over data issues and data cases? And there are a lot of changes that are happening in terms of tax regimes. Now, in most of the jurisdictions, the innovation within the field is that they're not using IP holding companies as companies to avoid taxes anymore, and we will need to more look into alternative ways and to advise with our tax lawyers on what these risks are. Because initially we were just letting the tax lawyers deal with the situation, and the IP team were not really involved in that. Now it's a very high risk because things are changing and there's a lot of firmer tax regulations that need to be dealt with. Now, what does that mean for us as as IP lawyers? We need to first help in creating more precedents for the practice in general in the Middle East. A simple question in Europe is not a simple one in the Middle East. Acquired distinctiveness in Europe is a complex issue in the Middle East. So we are still at that level. So we need to, as much as we can, to import knowledge, to import practice and experience in order to present those to courts and try to start building these precedents in order to get up to speed with what is required for us to build a good infrastructure for an economy that can attract investments in knowledge and innovation. This would definitely create new investment opportunities. We also need to understand better the slicing of the value chain of intellectual property services. And there's another slide after that where I'm going to talk about this in more detail. But we need to expand our legal work in order to cover other issues on the full IP chain value services. If we don't do that, there are a lot of things there's a lot of work that we're going to lose because of two main issues. Innovation and technology are now getting into the work that we do and taking a lot of the low value work. I'm not saying low value as in it's not important. It's very important, but the type of work becomes more executional than it is strategic. And that type of work, we're talking about mainly prosecution, straightforward counterfeiting, online and offline. This type of work, we've seen a lot of technology tools that are coming in and taking big part of that. And this provides a lot of scale and speed and cost efficiency in doing this part. So lawyers for the past 10 years and IP service providers for the past 10 years have been losing that level of work to technology. And in the future, they're going to lose much more. Now, in the middle rests the pure legal work as in litigation and contract and commercial. But on the top, you've got the strategic type of work, like managing multi-jurisdictional litigation, portfolio strategies, valuation strategies, growth of intangible assets strategies, and all these sorts of things. Lawyers have not really jumped, and IP service, and when I say lawyers, I mean all IP service providers as well and attorneys. They have not really stepped up enough to take that part, and they were late to do so. And this is where we found a lot of the big consulting firms have jumped in, and they started doing that by recruiting a lot of IP lawyers and IP practitioners within their businesses, but they're presenting these kind of government and non-government consultancy proposals and propositions. So to sum up what happened, what we're talking about here in terms of the IP services market, we look at them in three main areas. So there is the deregulation, the delegalization, and the disintegration. Deregulation, this is where we talked about slicing up the value chain and taking a big chunk of the value chain off first the lawyer's hands into IP attorneys' hands, and then further into technology. And delegalization, that impact is by slicing this value chain and taking the upper chunk into non-lawyers and non-IP practitioners that are pure consultants, that are able to advise governments today on strategy and IP owners on strategy. And these people are not talking with the IP team. These people are not talking to the CEO. And the IP teams need to step up as well when they're slicing this value chain up and start dealing at that level. And lawyers, as we said, need to forget about the law degree and start becoming innovative. I mean, I'm not saying that not be a lawyer, but we know that because of the whole risk assessment approach and mentality that we have as lawyers, we're less likely inherently to innovate. But in IP, most IP lawyers do innovate, so let's continue doing that. In terms of this intermediation, it's a nice development in terms of how IP businesses used to deal with their intellectual property. They used to go to IP service providers, then they started just dealing with one holding provider who's instructing many, and now they're actually going through technology, they're able in many jurisdictions to go directly to the trademark office. So an IP team now sitting within a business can actually fully manage, register, protect, and enforce intellectual property rights through technology without needing the IP services market to interfere. And that's something that technology is introducing today, and IP teams need to be prepared for. Now, these changes, we've always believed that they're going to impact the industry in, like, let's say 2030, 2035. If we don't innovate, most of our work is going to, sorry to say, but possibly is going to be obsolete, or we're going to be stuck in between there, just the legal service itself within IP, which is not possibly enough for specialist IP practitioner. However, with COVID, we have realized that it has been echoed. So it has been expedited. People now use technology much more than they used to do technology in 2019. People today understand that the supply chain can be interrupted, and we need to find solutions to the supply chain. People today understand that technology and ideas travel much faster than the actual end product, and how can we rely on this? And that really relates to the Middle East. I mean, just thinking about a very old Arab philosopher who used to be a philosopher in Andalusia in Spain. At the time the Arabs were there, he's called Ibn Rushd. And Ibn Rushd was a liberal philosopher, a Muslim sheikh, and a liberal philosopher. He wrote about religion, and he wrote about a lot of other things. There was like a wave of Islamist extremism back then. It's very similar to the one we've seen in the past few years with ISIS. And they considered him to be an infidel. And he's been charged. and they took all his books, including the ones he wrote about Islam, and they burned them in front of his students and in front of him as a penalty. Now, he saw his student crying. And when he saw his student crying, he asked him, why are you crying? If you're actually crying on what Islam has reached to, the sea would not be enough for your tears. But if you're crying because the book's being burned, you still don't know that ideas have wings and they can travel everywhere. And to be honest, if we look into the Renaissance in Europe in the 14th century, we find a lot of translated books of Ibn Rushd protected with protection to his moral rights, because it says it is Ibn Rushd. And it was a very, we can say it was a big portion or a significant portion of the intellectual capital of the Renaissance in Europe. We don't have these books in Arabic. We only have reference of these books in the translated version in Europe during the Renaissance. And it was true that his ideas traveled and were able to assist as an intellectual capital somewhere else. So this is exactly what we need to apply today in our perspective to innovation and intellectual property and the future of the intellectual capital. This slide only sums up all the other circles that we were looking at. I'm not going to bore you again by talking about them in more detail, but it's just a summary of everything in one funny looking circle. Thank you, Hazem. I think I'll give you the floor for now.
Thank you, Basil, for this interesting presentation and taking us into a roller coaster ride in intellectual property and innovation. Innovation is definitely something that is very important and is a fuel to our economy and the growth, and counterfeits is killing innovators and killing innovation. So it's a very important topic to be discussed. I believe we have not received any questions. So if there's any questions, you can drop it in the comment box. If not, we could move to our next session. I think we can move on to our next and final session. So thanks all the participants for staying with us for almost 3 hours and a half now. So our next session will be presented by Uchi Nokosha, who is a Harvard alumni, joined the firm in 2003 and was admitted to partnership in 2008. She has experience in trademark clearance and expiation, patents, dispute resolution, franchising, technology transfer, and product registration. She heads the intellectual property department for the firm and advises local and international clients on a full range of brand-related matters, including the licensing, franchising, technology transfer agreement with NOTAP. So, Ucha, I think I can share your slides from my.
Hi.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right.
So thank you so much for having me. So I have not really been in a webinar in the last year and months where COVID-19 was not made the, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep, can hear you.
Okay. Where COVID-19 was not made the central discussion point. So the lockdown that was implemented around the world sort of brought untold hardship to all stakeholders, meaning shoppers, brand owners especially, and nationals from every corner of the globe. I just thought I should put that out, to set the tone for today's discussion. So if I could have the first slide. So people sat at homes with nothing to do, and shops were closed. So the only option was to shop online. And it is believed that you perfect at a thing that you do frequently. So as people were shopping online, they become more and more advanced with their shopping options, and then streaming everything from entertainment to fashion. And the demographic involved are usually from ages 25 to 34, being the digital citizens. These are the group of people that grew up with e-commerce. So it's okay to just from their phone order so many things online and get them delivered their doorstep. Next slide, please. So that made brand owners to close the normal brick and mortar stores and move online because nobody was going out. So shops, in fact, I realized recently that some brick and mortar stores have closed, really shut down, closed some of the branches, because it's so difficult to continue to have overhead over things, and then monies were just going out and not coming in. So that brought about some closures. And we are living in an unprecedented era where we are really connected from our homes, we are connected around the world. And it has been predicted that by year 2030, that these digital economies will really bring about some sort of economic boom that has never been seen before. So it's like you see AI, you see blockchain. So things are really coming, innovation. And then if you really, companies that do not innovate will simply die. So things are really changing, the way people shop, the way we live our lives. So you need managers, we need to jump into the bandwagon. And then with this age, they're not slowing down. Nobody is doing things the way we used to do them in the past. Sadly, counterfeiters are really like capitalizing on this because it's so easy, they're hidden. You cannot see them until, unlike in the past, where you probably the government regulators will go and impound them, or the customs and all that, but online, and they keep switching and moving. So if you catch them there, they close that site and move elsewhere. So it's kind of difficult to really track them. And this is negatively impacting businesses worldwide. And TikTok, I mean, most brands have manufacturing factories in China. And then with the emerging threats from China's TikTok, it cannot ever be overemphasized. Just recently, in the last week, a TV personality here in the US they were attempting to scam her. And then she faked that the conversation is being recorded and there is a direct line to FBI, and the guy quickly dropped. So it's like it's becoming too frequent, and people are being scammed every hour, every minute. Next slide, please. Live streaming. That is the order of the day. This is where retailers, influencers, celebrities, everybody, all commerce, you can come and then sell your product and your services. It's become very popular among the same demographic, 25 to 34, especially during this COVID-19 and even post-COVID-19, because it's, like I say, it's here to stay. And all parties to the transaction are connected, and it is very innovative because you get your prices in real time. So it's like, and then it's only for 1 hour. And this also made it very easy for counterfeiters to just find a way to just come in. And then, I mean, it's too short a time to really do anything. So they can come and mix and then sell their own counterfeit products along the way. Next slide, please. Social media, like WeChat. This is very, even though it's so simplified, but it's the most, I just learned most recently that in China, they even use it to pay salaries for some staff. So you can imagine the kind of exposure of financial issues to the rest of the world. And then the rest of the world, you have more, for every 3 person, you probably have one person with such criminal mind. So you can imagine these getting into the hands of counterfeiters, and it does happen all the time. because it's very popular in China. They use it to order grocery, restaurant orders, gaming, and all that. So the bad thing is that it's connected to the your financial history. So it's very, very difficult to really contain. And then the celebrity blogs, we know that Instagram, even among celebrities, people are using other celebrities' contacts or their faces. So this menace is so bad. It's all over the world. Even in law firms, I remembered some, I think 2 years ago, we saw our website with our lawyers being advertised somewhere in Asia as by another law firm. So it's so common for people to steal. E-commerce really brought untold hardship to, even though it's a good thing, but then it brought its own criminal intents. It showcased it and kind of highlighted it as a result of COVID. And when they do this, they redirect all sorts of issues. And then especially with the scamming, where the scammers will actually inject themselves into an original email and then redirect the funds to them. And it's happening too frequently because people, perhaps I use the law firm as an example because I'm a lawyer, and I know that law firms represent celebrities and big corporations, and monies do pass around because sometimes a law firm could hold money in trust for their clients. And then when they now call for it, and then these scammers inject themselves into the email, and then perhaps maybe the paralegal didn't just double check, just a few things, and before you know it, with one click, the money is gone. It's very dangerous. Next check, next slide. E-commerce. This is becoming too frequent because it's also as a result of COVID, because we are at home. Nobody was attending parties or dinner, and then all your clothes in the wardrobe, of course, you want to clog your wardrobe, and people started selling. I have a friend that was selling. In fact, she sold one of the items that she and I bought at the same time. When I asked her, she said she sold it. So people were selling, and especially for people that lost jobs during COVID-19, they were selling to make extra cash. And also it's an opportunity for the younger generation to own brands that ordinarily they might not be able to afford, so they can buy it here. But the problem too is that the counterfeiters found their way here as well, because as they sell, it's easy to detect the sales that are by a third party that is a counterfeiting item, because it appears several times. Because if I was selling online and I'm trying to sell my wristwatch, it will be just once. But when these counterfeiters get involved, they have several, so they keep selling to tell you they've gone to, they produced counterfeit and they have more where it came from. Next slide, please. Yeah, data collection. If you, we all like, if you use Netflix or buy from Amazon, or buy air tickets, book hotel, we all know that our data being collected, even with our offices, the workplaces, your data can be shared with the healthcare provider, and then data is always there. And with this, they monitor your shopping behavior or your lifestyle. So sometimes Netflix will recommend some movies they think you will be interested in. The same way the marketers will always call your phone. We all see that because your data is out there. And it's really bad, because if the information gets into the hands of the counterfeiters, untold hardship will be on the data subject, who is the owner of the data. Next slide. So there are a few challenges. Lack of enforcement, because the fact that the brand owners moved online, so they really don't have access to regulatory bottlenecks or all those stop and search, or maybe the customs having to check and see, because some countries have maybe custom recorder. In Nigeria, we don't. So we have brand owners signing MOU with the customs so that they know, and you give them the indicators so that they know when the counterfeit is coming, and then they alert the owners, for immediate destruction or whatever. But with online, businesses are no longer on ground, so it's very difficult, really, for you to work with the enforcement agencies, except for the takedown that they do online with the e-commerce channels, which is not, in some cases, it's not very effective because they keep moving, and then how do you catch them? And the brand ambassadors, they're almost taking the job from professionals, because everybody, for brands, so rather that a brand ambassador wears the clothes and then they pay them so much. So with that comes also some challenges, counterfeiters, and everybody stealing everybody's identity, and all that sort of ill practice. Redirection, I've mentioned that counterfeiters often manipulate or hack into a genuine website. Really, oftentimes they do that and redirect into the dark web. It's so difficult to really, a lot is happening online that one click, you have moved, you've gone on. There are cases of ransomware where some celebrities, maybe the data that they have with a law firm or some, and then they hacked into that, and then they started asking for millions of dollars, So with that, when I come to action, you will see that security is good. You really need to have insurance, to take care of these sort of things. Next slide. Because there was no point mentioning the COVID fake tests and fake certificates and fake passports. It's the order of the day. They are just doing it from the dark web, and it's really bad. It's something has to be done. So the action points, the financial services should have multi-level security. You have sometimes, I always use Apple as an example. Sometimes Apple will send me a message and say that somebody is attempting to use my Apple ID in some local community in Nigeria. They let you know. So security is good. The bank should really do that, have multi-level, so that people to stop and dissuade people from using common pins like 123 ABC or your dog's name or your birthday. You really need to be a bit creative in creating your PIN, so that you at least you make it difficult for people to hack into your system. There should also be collaboration between e-commerce channels and brand owners. I think that the International Trademark Association is making a good, doing some good work in this area with the Shop Safe Act, and then so that, and it's a collaboration, so that these are the things they need to work together really than working, separately. And businesses should take out insurance against ransomware, and then they should see security as costs. They need to discuss it upfront. Don't just react when it happens. Don't see it as a cost. You need to see it as an investment. So really, you need to discuss it, put it in your business plan, and allocate money for it, because these are the things you could do to really keep it down. And again, government should see counterfeiting as global threat, the same way they see terrorism, because they are linked, child labor, crime, and stuff like that. So they should really make it priority and then fight counterfeiters. Finally, I will say, protect your phones and other devices by holding them very close to your chest, because that is the way you must do your own part and then look at government, because online there, and anything you don't want to be used against, you don't put it out there. Any data, when companies are coming to you and say, okay, have free trial for 1 month, and you've put in your data, it's gone, and they're using it because those are the benefits, for giving you free trial. So you need to really be selective and know where you're putting your data out there, because data is king and it's money. And with that, I will end my discussion. If you have any questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Uche, for this insightful presentation. I think a key point that you've mentioned is collaboration between e-commerce sites and brand owners, and the fact that government need to consider counterfeiting and illicit trade as a key threat to the economy. I think we have not received questions. If we have any questions, please drop it in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand. I think as of now, we haven't received any questions. So thank you, Uche, for your presentation and for your time. We really appreciate your time today. And as of now, we've reached to the end of our first day of the third virtual Anti-Counterfeiting and Brand Protection Conference. So as well as we look forward for seeing you tomorrow again as well. On the day 2, we have some very interesting topics to be discussed. We have a lot of brands who will be sharing successful case studies in confiscating seizures of counterfeit goods. And we are also happy and excited to announce our physical event, which will be held in Abu Dhabi in Grand Hyatt Hotel, Abu Dhabi on the 27th and the 20th of October. So, I mean, we would love to see you there as well. So we definitely look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks to all the presenters and the participants for staying for almost 4 hours on the day 1. So see you tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Be ending the meeting now. Thank you.